In 1927, studio head Louis B. Mayer had a dream to unite the 5 branches of the film industry: actors, directors, producers, technicians, and writers. His dream was to stop them all from unionizing so that he could continue to reap the rewards of their hard work and live the life he had become accustomed to. So he summoned 36 of the most prestigious names of the time to a banquet and explained his plans. And after collecting $100 from each of them, they formed the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I found that the best way to handle filmmakers was to hang medals all over them. If I got them cups and awards, they'd kill to produce what I wanted, old Louis B. said. And on February 27th, 1935, at the Biltmore Bowl of the Biltmore Hotel, the 7th Academy Awards were held. And today, many, many years later, Moronic Logic is proud to present Golden Boy! Welcome to the 7th Academy Awards from 1935. Tonight's nominees for Golden Boy: It Happened One Night by Frank Capra, The House of Rothschild by Alfred L. Worker, Viva Via by Jack Conway, The Thin Man by W.S. Van Dyke, Here Comes the Navy by Lloyd Bacon, Cleopatra by Cecil B. DeMille, One Night of Love by Victor Schertzinger, The Barracks of Wimpole Street, Sidney Franklin, The Gay Divorcee by Mark Sandridge, The White Parade by Irving Cummings, Imitation of Life by John M. Stahl, and Flirtation Walk by Frank Borzage. We're talking 12 movies, people. The like and subscribe symbol is showing right now. Welcome to the 7th Academy Awards and Golden Boy, Episode 7. I'm your host, Kenny Cahoon. You might know me from, let's be honest, at this point, you know me from Golden Boy. This show now has more episodes than Presenting Alfred Hitchcock at this point. You can watch Presenting Alfred Hitchcock on YouTube. I did that show with Sam Holland and Lance Hawthorne, the other 2 founders of Moronic Logic. Does deep dives into Hitchcock's films in chronological order. We do everything on this show in chronological order, as you guys know. We read books, we cite sources, we pause every second to look for cats in the background of scenes. This show ain't like that. Every month in Golden Boy, I'm joined by a friend, family member, co-worker, famous actor, expert, or person I met while being rescued at sea. And we watch every movie nominated for Best Picture in a given year. We tell you what to skip, what to watch, and what movie should have won the Golden Boy that year. Golden Boy is slang for Oscar, which, if you watched last episode, you know Eleanor Lilleberg was nominated and won on this show as the person who created the word and term Oscar for the awards. Go watch episode 6 for that information. I'd like to thank Jessica Goldstein, executive producer. She actually gifted me a new Shure microphone to use for this episode, and I could not figure out how to set it up in time. So we're still on a Blue Yeti. Next episode, I'm sure you'll be like, wow, what a professional sound coming out of Kenny. I'd like to thank Sam Holland and Lance Hawthorne again, my Hitchcock cohorts. Those guys support this show in spirit, and I'm very happy that they have now put a hit on me for sidelining the Hitchcock show in favor of this. Thanks, guys! And I'd like to thank this week's guest. I might know her from helping me move 15 years ago. Oh, right. That's when my life was spiraling out of control. We became fast friends, drove around town in a beat-up convertible, blasting the Clash of Sandinista triple album. We high-fived at H.P. Lovecraft's grave and held private readings of my unproduced Western play. She's an author. Her instructional dance memoir, designed to summon spirits, titled 7 Dances for a Secret Self, was released by Model City Books. See the link below in the description. In 2013, she spoke with Andy Kaufman's father and received permission to premiere Andy's teenage play, Bohemian West, in Providence, Rhode Island. Today, she runs the Hudson Valley Newsstand in upstate New York, a newsstand which works to support local artists and small presses with distribution. She's creative, unpredictable, hilarious, and the dictionary definition of a go-getter. I'd like to welcome Sarah Louise Reiter.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
All my friends are really excited about this. They're like, "You're doing what?"
Yeah, I know, because we pretty much, I don't know if you've seen, but our subscriber count is like 180 now. Like we're the
That's
real deal at this point.
yeah.
Yeah. Like, the podcast gets like 25 downloads a month. I mean, we're blowing up.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to have you do this.
Start a Patreon, right? Start a Patreon?
Oh yeah, the Patreon's got to come next. So Sarah, you had to watch 12 movies for this episode. How'd that go?
I'm not a big movie watcher, which is funny. I mean, I do like to think about movies, and when I get excited about movies, I get excited about them, but I'm not like a see every movie kind of person. And something really interesting happened after watching 10 movies from the 1930s in succession very quickly. The day after, I watched maybe like 2 in one day, and this was after like a few days of watching them. I started looking at Instagram and it stopped making sense to me. Like I just didn't understand it anymore. I was like, whatever these people are talking about it's just not funny anymore. It was a really strange thing that happened because my brain was like reoriented to thinking like the 1930s. And there are some really specific qualities specifically to these movies and to the era in general that was really kind of like part and parcel of that. You know, one of the biggest things about this time is snappy dialogue, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I would say definitely the movie that won and some of the other nominees, that was their strong point. So once you're kind of thinking in that mindset and your brain is kind of thinking like that, you look at Instagram and you're just like, it's a completely different world.
That's interesting. So you were transported to 1934 by watching 12 movies right in a row from that year or from
Yeah, just
33.
cognitively, my brain was not prepared for Instagram afterwards.
Oh, that's awesome. You know, it's funny because one of the criticisms that I've heard about this show is that we don't maybe do a good job putting these movies in context of the year. We didn't grow up in the Depression, right? So all we can do is look at it from today. And I think you can forgive certain things, like in Shanghai Express. I feel like if you made Shanghai Express, this is from a previous Oscar, today, and you put a person in yellow face, it would be people going nuts. But viewing it in context of the 30s, which I think we do a decent job here, you can still say, yeah, that's racist, but you know, it was a good movie. We're gonna have issues with that in this
Yeah.
episode, right?
What's interesting about that is one of the movies in particular, I kind of did a little bit of a further investigation of that because I think one of the assumptions that you would make is, oh, it was the 1930s and people weren't as forward thinking back then. But
Yeah.
there was a particular movie in which there was a whole YouTube video that I watched where a person was like, I assumed because it was the 1930s, it was fine, but actually people were criticizing this movie at the time, which was
Yeah.
very interesting, right?
People have been probably racist since there were people. Like it's not like, oh, they were more racist in the 30s. No, they're just as racist today. And there were people who were not very racist back then. And I think of some of these movies, there are not people who are thinking, I don't want to do racist things, but they're trying to work within that system.
Then again, I think we've at least progressed beyond black people look like white people with shoe polish on their face.
Yeah.
It is interesting to see that there was progression within the kind of racism that they were doing. Some of these movies that we're going to watch haven't been put out into distribution, and there's a reason why. And I would argue that some of the reasons why had to do with their treatment of race in the movie. And the reason that some things become classic and don't has to do with our attitudes that change. So bringing it up, the fact that it's racist doesn't mean that, you know, you're not viewing it with an understanding of that time. It just means you have to mention it because to overlook it would be just negligible. It would be negligible to not investigate what's very interesting about it being now and being then.
Yeah, we're not cowards on this show. We're going to talk about it. We're not going to gloss over it. We're going to talk about it. If you put it in your movie, we're going to talk about it. Sarah, now that you're a denizen of 1934 and you can't go to Instagram anymore, What is going on in 1934? Do you have any historical background? Do you remember, or from school, or from of this year, or what's going on in the early 30s?
I, because of the movies, did some research just about what was going on at that time. And it was somewhat at the rise of the Nazis. It was getting very close to where, particularly in between World War One and World War Two, which positions the military films in a really interesting place. So, for example, in Here Comes the Navy, they're flying a dirigible. That
Yeah.
is the most interesting part of that movie, and the most interesting of the themes of these movies is the air technology which is being used, because airplanes don't seem to be it's not present. They're not evolved to the point that they become commercial, or
Yeah, I don't think there's any commercial flights at this point. There's not like,
there wasn't an air force.
yeah.
That will come up when we talk about Here Comes the Navy, because he says he wants to go be in the Air Corps.
We'll talk for more about those for sure when we hit those two movies, the military movies. But the Hays Code, we have to talk about the production code. And 1934, I've learned from last episode, it's July 1st is the D-Day for the production code. All the movies made before July 1st are still pre-code. All the movies made after July 1st, 1934 are all code movies. And they'll have that screen at the beginning that has the seal of the production code. Since I watched these movies chronologically when they came out, I think the first one, was it Cleopatra? Cleopatra might have been the first one that had the code seal at the beginning.
It definitely wasn't going in It Happened One Night, and
Yeah, no, it was not there.
just tell by watching that. But there's definitely, obviously, a switch between the two of them. I'd be interested to hear what kind of things the Hays Code covered, because, like, say, for example, in The Thin Man, there's drinking to excess, which I know it's a post, prohibition time, but the amount of drinking that's in that movie is to excess. Is that covered by the Hays Code?
That's a really good question, Sarah, and the answer to that is this. According to the Motion Picture Production Code, or the Hays Code, no picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it. The sympathy of the audience shall never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. That is essentially part of their mission statement. When it comes to liquor, here's what they say. The use of liquor in American life when not required by the plot or for proper characterization should not be shown. The use of liquor should never be excessively presented, even in picturing countries where its use is legal. In scenes from American life, the necessities of plot and proper characterization alone justify its use, and in this case, it should be shown with moderation. So you can use it if the plot demands it and if the characters demand it, but you cannot use it excessively. All right, Kenny, back to you. Well, I mean, all right, so the things that our movies are that we're going to be talking about that are covered for sure is old term miscegenation. They did not want black people and white people to be in a relationship in movies. That was a no-no. They did not want a bad person to, if you were bad, you were bad. So if you're like a woman hard in your luck and you rob a convenience store, you couldn't have a happy ending in the movie. You were the villain of the movie. Like, so the complexities of like good people being forced to do something bad, that is gone from these movies.
Is that why the movies got worse? Because I watched previous episodes of this, and the movies had such complex storylines, and I was kind of disappointed by some of the treatments in some of these films.
From 1934 to 1954, I want to make a correction here. William Hays wrote the Hays Code. He's the author of it, and we've been using him on the show as like the villain. I've had little pop-ups for the people who listen to it. On the video one, I've had his head pop up whenever I'm saying someone ruined this movie. Hays is not the villain. We're changing the villain. The villain is a guy named Joseph Breen. Joseph Breen, and let me just read a little thing quickly for you, Sarah, from Wikipedia. Joseph Breen was a tough Irish Catholic. He was appointed by Hays to head the Production Code Administration and administer the Motion Picture Code. So it was his job to make sure that these movies adhered to it. And after July 1st, he was hardcore doing that. There's plenty of examples of him, and I would recommend people go to YouTube and watch videos on him by other people who are more in depth. But he was known to have written a lot of anti-Semitic stuff. He protected pro-German ideas, and this is the build-up to Nazi Germany. He did not want to offend Germany, but he had no problem offending Jewish people. He did not want to have Jewish things in the movies. He accused Hollywood of being run by Jews. Like this is like probably where this whole, even today, people say, I've heard racist people say things like, media is run by Jews. Joseph Breen's probably the first guy who's bringing this concept forward. And this is the guy who is molding how we feel about our country and how we feel about the world by forcing these movies to follow this, what I call for this episode, the taming of the shrew. And it's funny that in the Taming of the Shrew, which I think is Shakespeare's worst play, where a female character who speaks her mind and is considered, very self-dependent, gets beaten down by a guy. And the whole point of it is, oh, good, she becomes a good wife by the end. So many of these women are strong characters in these movies we're going to talk about, Sarah. And it's like the point of the movie is that the guy needs to like get her whipped into shape.
That was one thing that I developed maybe from watching the movies was, wow, I have different values than 1934, for sure. What will be really interesting is to know whether or not these movies were made pre or post code. Do you know which ones were?
Yeah, we'll do them in order. So pre-code ones that we're going to talk about today are It Happened One Night, House of Rothschild, Viva Via, The Thin Man, Here Comes the Navy. The post-code movies we're going to be talking about are Cleopatra, One Night of Love, Barretts of Wimpole Street, The Gay Divorcee, White Parade, Imitation of Life, and Flirtation Walk. And each of those, when we get to them, there's going to be notes from the Hays Code of things he tried to change or arguments he made that wouldn't let them do certain things.
House of Rothschild, he must have hated that movie.
He was very mad. There was a lot of problems he had with that movie. All right, so we're already starting to talk about movies. So why don't we do that? Are you ready to go?
Yeah, which movie are we starting with?
It Happened One Night. Came out February 22nd, 1934, directed by Frank Capra. I watched this on the Criterion Blu-ray, which I picked up from the Criterion sale at Barnes & Noble. Sarah, how did you watch this movie?
So the way that I acquired most of these movies is if you go to Roku device and you just search, it will tell you all the places that have them available. We have the Criterion channel, but just because something's in Criterion doesn't mean it's in the Criterion channel.
And a lot of these movies are just not available to stream anywhere, which is really kind of sad. And another reason why I support physical media. The movie was 105 minutes. It starred Claudette Colbert as Ellen Ellie Andrews, Clark Gable as Peter Warren, and Roscoe Carnes as Oscar Shapley, the annoying bus passenger. This was nominated 5 times at the Academy Awards, and it won 5 times, setting a record. Actor Clark Gable, actress Claudette Colbert, Best Picture, It Happened One Night, director Frank Capra, writing Robert Riskin. 3 times in Oscar history that a movie has swept all the major awards. I think Silence of the Lambs and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It Happened One Night is a 1934 pre-code American romantic comedy film with elements of screwball comedy, in which a pampered socialite tries to get out from under her father's thumb and falls in love with a roguish reporter. The screenplay by Robert Riskin is based on the August 1933 short story Night Bus by Samuel Hopkins Adams, which provided the shooting title. Classified as a pre-code production, the film is among the last romantic comedies created before the MPPDA began rigidly enforcing the motion picture production code in July 1934. Sarah, tell me what you think on this. Happened One Night may have inspired certain characteristics of the cartoon character Bugs Bunny, who made his first appearance 6 years later.
Well, yeah, that's where Looney Tunes was drawn from. If you watch Looney Tunes, one of the things that I said to you when we started doing this project is, wow, I bet you understand a lot more quotes from Looney Tunes and references to Looney Tunes now, because they used to do all the different characters. I'm trying to remember that kind of gremlinish man that they referenced a lot with the big eyes.
Ned Sparks?
No, he plays like...
Peter Lorre?
Yeah, Peter Lorre's all over that. So is Bugs Bunny inspired by this? Sure, but as much as it would be inspired by any other leading man, I would say I could see Bugs Bunny in the Fred Astaire character in the other movie, because it's all this kind of fast-talking, confident man with a sense of humor, right? Like,
well, you don't think someone was watching It Happens One Night and was just like, carrots. Like, I could see a rabbit talking like that.
There were probably people who watched cartoons that were like enthusiastic about it because it reminded them of their favorite characters in films and things like that. But do I think directly that Bugs Bunny was inspired by
this character.
Gable, I think that's, a tentative connection at best.
Okay. All right, synopsis. Spoiled heiress Ellen Ellie Andrews has eloped with pilot and fortune hunter King Wesley against the wishes of her extremely wealthy father, Alexander Andrews, who wants to have the marriage annulled because he knows that Wesley is really only interested in Ellie's money. So Ellie jumps ship in Florida and runs away, boarding a Greyhound bus to New York City to reunite with her husband. She meets fellow passenger Peter Warren, a newspaper reporter who recently lost his job. Peter recognizes her and gives her a choice. If she gives him an exclusive on her story, he will help her reunite with Wesley. If not, he will tell her father where she is. Ellie reluctantly agrees. After several adventures, Ellie loses her initial disdain for Peter and they begin to fall in love. When the bus breaks down after a boisterous rendition of The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze, they begin hitchhiking. Near the end of their journey, stopping at one more hotel, Ellie confesses her love to Peter. He at first rejects her advances, but then wakes up in the middle of the night, sneaks away to secure the money to properly marry her. But oh no! The motel owners wake up and kick her out, fearing they have been swindled. Ellie's picked up by her father and agrees to marry Wesley. On the wedding day, she reveals the whole story to her father. Peter shows up and insists on being paid $39.60 for items that he had been forced to sell to buy gasoline. He passes on the reward money, but admits to Ellie's father that he loves her and storms out. But Ellie is about to marry Wesley. Oh no! But at the last minute, she starts the trend of runaway brides in movies by running away and leaving the groom at the altar. A running subplot about a blanket being hung on a clothesline between Ellie and Peter while they sleep to maintain their dignity ends when Ellie's marriage is annulled and she's able to officially be with Peter, and we get a thirsty shot of a blanket falling to the ground. The end. Sarah!
Yeah.
What'd you think of this movie?
It was fun. I mean, I think it's a movie from 1934 that you could still watch today without getting angry, and you could enjoy it. One of the best things about this movie is the depiction of poor people having so much fun. When I read about the movie and they said that critics dismissed the film, the New Yorker called it nonsense and quite dreary.
Oh, wow.
However, it became a hit when it hit secondary movie houses. So even the actress Colbert was like, as I told you, she just called her friend when this was over and was quoted as saying, "I just finished the worst picture in the world."
Yeah, I don't think Clark Gable was happy to be in this movie either. It was a quick, short, I think they filmed it in like a couple of weeks, and they had like no real script, but it worked. I think it worked because their chemistry, the two of them, is really good.
And for whatever reason, romance at that time was just portrayed as very antagonist. That was what romance was in 1934, which I thought was interesting. It wasn't sweetness. All of the romances in each one of these movies is portrayed in this really back and forth resistance kind of way. And on the most part, like you're saying, it's usually the woman who's resisting. In this movie, the main character, played by Colbert, was really just trying to be independent and failing wholly at that. When you were talking about in one of the earlier episodes, cigarettes for women as a sense of independence, there's a part in the movie where she's trying to buy cigarettes and Clark Gable takes her purse and was like, "You can't afford to buy cigarettes right now." So she is failing at being independent.
She's also, this is like the third guy, according to what she says, that she's like, there's her dad, she got snuck out once and met this King Wesley guy, and then she's immediately like, all right, I'm marrying this guy. And then she sneaks out this time and meets Clark Gable, Peter Warren. And now, by the end of the movie, she wants to marry this guy. It's this weird sheltered thing where I'm not sure, like, we're rooting. I don't know what we're rooting for her to do. If it's to escape and like striking out on her own, she doesn't really succeed at that by the end. She's kind of right back.
She's never really trying to be independent because even when she's left, she's on her way to meet her fiance.
Yeah.
So it's not like she's doing anything truly independent. And in the end of the movie, she's just crying, saying, "I can't imagine having a good life without you, Clark Gable."
Yeah.
Like, in terms of female independence, it's not a great movie. And maybe that's why I didn't really care for, like, I didn't feel like it was one of the best movies ever, because it was fun and they're just singing and dancing on the bus. And
that scene was great, though. I thought that was a key scene in the movie. They're riding on the bus. Someone starts singing the Man in the Flying Trapeze. For some reason, everybody knows the song. It's weird though, people must have listened to music back then. You know, maybe some people have the ability to play records, but you know, you're probably seeing a lot of things live, so you're probably singing along a lot. Knowing the words is probably more important
Sure,
then.
and sheet music. At that time, people were much more talented. They had sheet music that they would take home and play. Whether it's a nice fantasy or actually how things were in the 1930s, they were really getting down on that bus.
You know, I did take a bus ride across country when I was 18, which I probably will mention a lot of these episodes. And there was a point where, and there wasn't a ton of people on the bus, it wasn't packed like this, but they did start singing, and it might have been 100 bottles of beer on the wall. Like someone I think started singing it in the back, and by the end, everyone was singing it. So that felt very true to life to me. I wish we were doing a more complex song like the trapeze song, and people were standing up and performing, but yeah, we were just sitting in our seat doing one of the most boring barroom songs. But Sarah, let me read this quote to you really quick. I talked about Taming of the Shrew earlier, and I think this is interesting, and it kind of informs what you're talking about with these relationships and the rest of the movies we're going towards. This is from a friend of Frank Capra's named Miles Connolly talking about this movie. This movie originally was about a Greenwich Village painter and a rich heiress on a bus. And Frank Capra's buddy is telling him that these are two characters you cannot relate to and that you have to change the characters. Now, your girl, don't let her be a brat because she's an heiress, but because she's bored with being an heiress. More sympathetic. And the man, forget that panty waist painter. Make him a guy we all know and like. Maybe a tough crusading reporter at outs with his pig-headed editor. More sympathetic. And when he meets the spoiled heiress, well, it's the taming of the shrew. But the shrew must be worth taming, and the guy that tames her must be one of us. So they were thinking, even back then, that we're doing Taming of the Shrew. This was in their heads making these movies.
And when I watched it, I said that to you. That was what I got from it. But it is an interesting retelling of it. And then they kind of tweaked it based on exactly the way they do with studio executives now. What do people like? In this movie, it's called It Happened One Night. Was this one night?
Yeah, it was 3 nights. So
right?
The question is, I guess, which night are they talking about? The night they first sleep together?
Which would be the end of the movie, right?
Well, I mean, they sleep in the same room the first time, but they have the sheet between them.
I think that it happened was her change from being difficult to loving him.
So that's night 2, I think, right?
Right. But does it matter which night? I guess not. Yeah. I guess it doesn't. But it just happened one night. I think it happened one night means she changed her mind one night. But the name of the original story that it was adapted from was actually, I gotta bring it up.
Night Bus, right?
Yeah. So which makes more sense.
Yeah. Because they're on the bus at night.
And it's about a journey. This is about a journey. It's not about the night. It's about her personal journey as a person and her personal journey physically and emotionally. Variety, which liked the movie, quoted as saying, without a particularly strong plot, manages to come through in a big way, which, you know, it isn't a particularly strong plot. But I would say for most of these movies, that's the case. That when I was watching each one of the movies, I was evaluating what the aspects of the movie are that got it nominated. Yeah. And this was not nominated for the storyline. It was nominated for the people in it and their ability to portray these characters in a really likable way.
There's not a lot you can find that's disagreeable in this movie, except maybe some of Clark Gable's sort of manhandling of Claudette Colbert at different points. And how old is she? She's like 20. She says, I think she's like 22 or something. It's weird that they still treat women in their young, early 20s like children. Like, and I don't think that's just this movie. It's like if you're 20 or 21. I think there was the other movie, Side Tangent. Claudette Colbert wins Best Actress for this movie. And she was up against Norma Shearer, who we're going to talk about in a little while, in Barrett's Wimpole Street. She was up against Mary from One Night of Love, which we're going to talk about. I can't remember her last name. And she was up against Bette Davis. And the thing with this Oscars is Bette Davis was a write-in. This Oscars, almost all of the actors had quit the Academy. So they had like literally 90 people that could vote for the best actors. So what the Academy allowed was people to write in, and this only did it for 2 years. And everyone wrote in after the initial nominations came out, those three I said, everyone wrote in Bette Davis for this movie called Of Human Bondage, which I watched last night. Bette Davis plays a waitress who is just emotionally unattached to anything. By the end of the movie, she dies of like, she's a prostitute, dies of like drug abuse in a squalor. Her baby dies. It's definitely an interesting performance. I didn't think it was better than Claudette Colbert here necessarily. I think she had one really great scene of Human Bondage.
And when you saw that movie, did you think, I understand why this wasn't nominated for Best Picture? Or is it
for sure. The Academy's like, oh, this movie's dealing with possible prostitution, a woman who is like really mean to a really sweet man who's like crazily obsessed with her, borderline stalking. One other thing, Sarah, these old movies, window peeping and dudes just not taking no for an answer and stalking women until they change their minds doesn't hold up well today.
Yeah, it's going to come up again a few times. But in this particular movie, he's a little bit less aggressive. I would say that for him. Partially what the appeal of this movie is that his intense disdain for rich people and his lack of need for them and his contempt for them and his ability to win over this woman who comes into it thinking she doesn't care about him at all and that his life is of no interest to her because she's going to go marry the lamest daredevil that exists.
Oh, yeah. So you had something on before we move on off this movie. I want to hear it. You have something on King Wesley, the daredevil that Claudette Colbert wants to marry in this movie.
He comes in at the end scene for their wedding for when they're supposed to be married in a vehicle which turned out to be an aircraft called an autogyro is actually what it's called. So it is similar to a helicopter, but much slower. And what the appeal of this was that it was an aircraft that could fly safely at low speeds, which is absolutely representative of the lameness of this guy. So they are legal currently to fly in the UK. In the US, you can fly one with an experimental aircraft license.
Wait, they're still experimental like 90 years later?
They're not really accepted because they're very dangerous.
Yeah, they sound dangerous. A mini helicopter that flies real slow and it's for one person?
Right. These aren't high-flying, dangerous airplanes. They're like carnival rides. They're really presented in these dinky ways. Like between this and the dirigible and Here Comes the Navy, you're just like, how do these guys feel manly at all flying around in this thing? But King Wesley was always presented as a person who had no appeal except that her father didn't like him. That was the main appeal. And the father said that to her, which was another issue I had with the movie, which was that the father openly accepted the Clark Gable character. He was just like, this guy's great.
He knew he didn't want the money. That's why. He's like, the other guy wants my money. Clark Gable doesn't want money. Oh, cool. Like
previous to that, his father's already coming around on him, just probably because he doesn't like King Wesley.
Oh, yeah.
But what kind of lesson is that? That was what I was saying to you before, is that the same lesson that's in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is if you're a very poor person and you have a chance to take as much money as you can from a rich person, don't do it because you'll get a bigger reward. Maybe that's some kind of message rich people were trying to put out there in the world. But what would the problem have been with him taking the money for the reward?
I mean, they should just feel gratitude. We offered this reward. We wanted you to have it. Oh, you don't want it? Well, we're giving it to you. But instead, it's treated like, no, you're supposed to not want that reward like us regular folks.
Oh, yeah, because it builds in the story to when the father offers King Wesley money to divorce her, because she's already married to him. That was the other thing in these movies, that despite all of the like moral code or whatever, there are two movies in which someone's already married and then they're falling in love with someone else. And maybe that's what is confusing to me about the passage of time, is that people will meet each other and then the same day be like, I'm falling in love with you. Well, I guess it's like the 30s and things moved a lot quicker back then. Because I would be like, whoa, this is day 3. Are you
Yeah.
sure you want to get married? Like,
Think this through. I don't even know, anything about you at this point. All right. The only other thing I have on this movie that I just want to say before we move on is Frank Capra, to me, feels like a director that is an outsider director. I feel like a lot of these other directors, they're building on this Hollywood lineage. And Capra's kind of bringing this weird energy. I mean, I'd read how he broke in, and it almost sounded like that kind of imposter story of someone who kind of sweet talks their way into a directing gig. He did this movie Lady for a Day in the last episode that I thought was just like so weird and different. And this movie has a lot of those weird and different elements where it's like a comedy, but then there's these great scenes of like, a train going by with all poor people on it waving at him, and the bus scene, and like there's just so many cool little weird quirks in there
oh,
that
sure.
that don't feel like a normal movie of this time.
For the most part, a lot of my notes I wish I could show you, just because for all of these movies, I drew a hat from every movie because
Oh, really?
the
Show
best.
it on the screen.
Let me see for this one. This was like her hat at the beginning, which was kind of, I don't know if I can. That's like
Oh, I can see it. Yep, we're looking at a hat, people on the radio.
It was like a shark fin down the middle of her hat. That was pretty early on. Here's one of my favorite quotes was Peter Warren, whose name I wrote down on this page that I can finally see. I never knew a rich man who could piggyback. So she is getting a piggyback from him because she's just having a miserable time. And they're having an argument about whether she's ridden piggyback before. And she's like, my father used to give me piggyback rides. And he's like, no, I never knew a rich man who could piggyback. And that was really fun.
And he had her on one shoulder too, which is, that's the question is that a piggyback if you just throw someone over your shoulder? Because to me, a piggyback, you're sitting on their shoulders.
Yeah. There was another quote that was really good when he was getting undressed and he starts telling her this story. I once knew a man who kept his hat on until he was completely undressed. That was the story he was telling her when he was getting undressed. That was really funny. I liked the phrase holy jumping catfish because in another one of the movies they bring up another catfish expletive that was really interesting. And the thumb on the nose movement. I did a little bit of research on that because I was interesting.
It's a big Charlie Chaplin maneuver.
Do you know what it's called?
No.
It's called cocking a snook or Queen Anne's fan.
So we're talking about you got your hand out like you're high-fiving, but instead your thumb is touching the tip of your nose and your hand is fanned out. And it's kind of kind of like a minor form of giving the finger, I think.
The phrase probably refers to Anne, Queen of England and Scotland, 1665 to 1714, who reigned from 1702 to 1714. The motivation for the choice of her name is unclear, but I guess people didn't like Queen Anne.
And that was something they came up with to let her know.
Yeah. Claudette Colbert was in 4 movies this year, and 3 of them were nominated. So something I was trying to track across these movies was her performance in each one of the movies. And she is a very good actress. Yeah. I don't know how she pulled this off.
She's different in each movie. She plays like an older mom in Imitation of Life. She's playing like a young 20-year-old girl in this one. And then she's playing this sex pot Cleopatra in the other movie. They're feel like all totally different characters.
But so for this particular movie, was this your favorite performance that she did?
Well, let's talk about the other movies when we get to them. But I really think she was fantastic in all of them.
Was she in movies from previous years that you've seen already?
She was in The Smiling Lieutenant, which is a movie from episode 5. And I remember when we talked about that movie in that episode, she played this poor girl who plays the violin. She ends up sleeping with Maurice Chevalier. She has a great line in the movie where she says something like, women who stay for breakfast often aren't invited back for dinner, or something along those lines, meaning like if you sleep with him the first night, it's not a good sign for the relationship. She's fantastic in that movie. And I remember saying like that girl, the violin girl, was really good. You ready for the next one?
I'm ready.
House of Rothschild. Came out April 7th, 1934, directed by Alfred J. Worker. I believe I watched this on the YouTubes.
I watched mine. I watched it on something called Continuum, which was on Roku. When you just search, 2 networks came up in Continuum was one of them. And the best thing about it is that it's a free service. I don't know who runs it, but absolutely no ads. You could watch
no ads.
Yeah.
Wow. On the time frame we have for the show, we have to find the movies however we can find them. We have a
Not
month.
only that,
Yeah.
you know, it's really easy when you get started doing this to watch the movies that you are interested in. And then once you're down to like, I mean,
Here Comes the Navy.
Well, Here Comes the Navy was one of the first ones I watched. And I thought it was going to be more pro-Navy and about getting people to join the Navy. But I guess in the particular time it was from, it just ended up being in a different direction.
So hold on, let me get through the cast. We got actress Loretta Young playing Julie Rothschild, actor George Arliss as Mayor Rothschild and Nathan Rothschild, his son, actor Boris Karloff playing Count Ladrantz, and actor Robert Young as Captain Fitzroy. This was nominated one time for Best Picture. Didn't win. House of Rothschild is a 1934 American pre-code historical drama. It was adapted by Nunnally Johnson from the play by George Humbert Wesley and chronicles the rise of the Rothschild family of European bankers.
That name is Nunnally. I've only met one other person named Nunnally in my life, or heard Nunnally one other time, but I think it's a really interesting name.
It is. What is the background of that name?
I did look up a few names, as we'll discuss later, but Nunnally is a girl's name of Irish origin. The meaning is dweller near the nuns' grove or meadow. So it is nun related. It is also a Saxon surname, Nunnally, an alteration of Nunnally Farm in Lancashire, England, where they held a family seat as lords of the manor in the 1400s.
Everyone at home, in case I haven't mentioned this episode, our sidekick here, our third host, is Wikipedia, who gets all of the solid information that we're reading directly to you. The movie was produced by Darryl F. Zanuck, who is not Jewish, as an attack on Nazism and anti-Semitism following Hitler's rise to power in Germany in 1933. The story was suggested to him by George Arliss, who is also not Jewish, who had made successful film appearances as Jewish characters like Shylock and Benjamin Disraeli, which we covered that movie in episode 3 of Golden Boy. Arliss was given the dual role of Amschel Rothschild and one of his sons, Nathan, who settled in England. Zanuck faced behind-the-scenes opposition from Jewish concerns such as the Anti-Defamation League. The screenplay passed the muster of the Hayes office, one of whose officials, James Wingate, found no cause for objection and even suggested it be shown to a representative of the German government, a step Zanuck refused to take. In December 1933, the project was endorsed by one major Jewish journal, the B'nai B'rith Messenger. So it's hard to tell just from that. Like, clearly this movie was controversial. I'm not sure if it's just because everyone making it wasn't Jewish and it was a Jewish movie. This is before Breen has taken over at the Hayes office. So right. He's not really there to put his foot down on this movie.
I watched this movie with a Jewish person just to make sure everything passed muster.
Oh, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
No, well, Jesse said it was a good movie, but to me, I wasn't sure I would get the full perspective on it. I mean, like, Judengasse was the name of the street in Frankfurt, and they just call it the Jew Street in the movie because they're translating things for us. That was a real thing, and the ghettos were a real thing. And I thought what was interesting about this movie was that it was used to kind of combat the rise of Nazism, but also in the history of it, it was also used in Nazi propaganda films. So there were things about this movie that could be used to reflect poorly on Jewish people. So I think historically it's an interesting movie because the Rothschilds are real people. They did amass a real fortune. Some of the history is abbreviated, but it's the most historically on point movie that we've seen. And it is the case of a movie where they were like, we better add a romance to this, otherwise people won't be interested in it. Yeah. The person who plays the daughter was not a real person. The timeline of the movie is a little bit off in terms of what they're representing, but it is the most straightforward of the movies in terms of representing something historical. When Gavin and I did Disraeli, with George Arliss plays these old historical characters, this seems to be his thing, and I think he does a great job at it. But the plot of Disraeli was them trying to secure like the Suez Canal. It was like, and they tried to force a romance into that one too, but it's so dry. And this movie is essentially like, he's trying to get a loan. He's trying to win a loan. And it's like,
for a movie, it's not, the dramatic tension is, I mean, there are scenes that are very dramatic at the beginning, that first scene where the Nazis or the German authorities are extorting money from this Jewish family.
Yeah, it's not the Nazis because it's set in 1780, but
Right.
it's to kind of represent the general kind of European dislike of Jews throughout the ages, which is why they made it, right?
Right. Kind of like, what is this movie about? Can you, without me reading the synopsis, can you
I
sum
would
that
say
up?
that the movie's about wealthy Jewish people trying to leverage their wealth to gain security in the European kind of zone. I'd say that was mainly what it is. They can't 100% stand by their principles because they have to leverage them
Yeah.
to get what they want.
Well,
So
the
even
principles are, he instructs his children to acquire money because money is power and money is the defense of the Jewish people.
right, but it's not that I don't think it's that crass. I think there's also the principle of unity that they talk about, that being able to be together on their decisions is really what helps them maintain their power, because without the unity of the family, and that's the big conflict in this movie, is that one of the guys goes against his brothers and sisters in the support of Napoleon, which Jesse will always happily tell you Napoleon was a friend to the Jews. But in the end, when he's making the decision to not support Napoleon and he's buying, he's putting his wealth at risk to secure the future for the Jewish people and their freedoms. So he's at the table with these guys who really don't respect him. So it's a movie that later in life would be about people of color who have to put themselves in a room with people who don't respect them. Because that's the big crux of the movie, is that they've got the most money. They're giving them the best deal for this loan. And because it's not during wartime, they no longer need the Jews' money. They're like, actually, we threw your bid out.
Well, Boris Karloff's character is essentially says that straight up. It's like, because you're the technicality of you not getting a loan is you're a Jew.
Right. I think that's a common story within the story of discrimination, is you got to work with people you don't like in order to get things if you're coming from a disadvantaged population. That's still true. It was the most forward thinking in that sense. When Boris Karloff was on the screen, I said to Jesse, I was like, that looks like Frankenstein. And he was like, yeah, because it's Boris Karloff. I was like, I don't know if it's because there's not makeup, like I would have needed to see green makeup to be sure it was Frankenstein, but he just straight up looks like Frankenstein in the movie. He doesn't look like a regular human being.
He's got that forehead and a very stern kind of mouth that's like a line.
And his eyes are hooded in this way that like creates
the eyebrows.
I wrote, he very naturally looks like Frankenstein. One of the other favorite things of this movie was the communication by passenger pigeon.
Oh yeah. That was interesting.
These are passenger pigeons right here. This is why I got this. This is from the very famous Audubon Society book, but these are extinct. I think we can contrast this when we get to talking about Viva Via. We can contrast this, the dryly historic, with making a comedy out of it, which was other direction that you could go in.
Those are two sides of a coin for historical recreation. House of Rothschild and Viva Via.
So you're talking about this movie in this context being approved by a Jewish federation, and when you look up Viva Via, the country of Mexico was like, this movie is an embarrassment to Mexico. They literally said something like that about it, where they were just incredibly displeased, and it's very easy to see why. So yeah, I think it is a little bit historically dry. I specifically noted there was no singing and dancing, so maybe it's just in contrast with the rest of the movies. What is important about this movie is the type of conflict it is. They do not develop the characters at all beyond the kind of like, here's this family, they're being put upon, they become rich, they have this decision to make. You don't get to know them as people. But I think
this movie, when it starts, I had that, oh no, there's like 6 kids, there's like parents, and you're like, who is who? But by the end of the movie, all you need to know is George Arliss is the dead father at the beginning and the son, because his character is really the only one
that's on screen at all. Because they talk about all the different locations, and I was trying to track what the different locations were. But that is one thing about 1930s movies. They expect you to keep up. They're like, come on, keep up. Let's go. In 2015, James Rothschild married Nikki Hilton. So the Rothschilds are still, there's another Rothschild descendant. They still have money. They don't have the most money, but they were like the richest family in the world at one time. So it's whether or not we like rich people is really what we're thinking about.
I mean, this felt to me like a throwback movie. Like it felt for the, which is funny, in the 30s, it felt like it had a lot of silent era kind of qualities to it still. They were filming it still like you said, not a lot of close-ups. This one felt like they're filming it like a play. A lot of these, the camera's in one corner of the room, and every time we cut to that, it's the same spot, you know?
I think that's interesting about this year of films, because there are only certain films that really show advancement in cinematography, and some of them are nominated for Best Picture. So that's when I'm saying that different films were nominated for different reasons. This was not nominated for cinematography.
Yeah.
It was not nominated for sound. It was not nominated for performances, because the performances were just fine. It was nominated because of the subject matter. It wasn't even nominated for the dialogue, I don't think.
Part of this too is for a 30s audience. Some of this is a little bit more relevant, like what's going on with the Rothschild family.
Well, but I guess it's relevant now in the sense that, there's still the Israel-Palestine conflict, and
right.
The center of that is, what the historic treatment of Jews has been and why they're trying to secure land for themselves, for better or for worse. I don't want to say anything controversial about that, except to say that this shows a historic mistreatment of Jews. This was in the 1780s, and then it was being reshown in the 1930s as a lesson about what had happened historically to Jews. So watching it now, you're still looking backwards and being like, here's two different periods of time where the Jews are being treated in a specific way, and it shows you context for why they're so ornery, I guess, about their personal space.
All right, you ready to move on?
What are you doing next?
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Viva Villa! This is actually perfect because we can now contrast these two movies. Came out April 10th, 1934, directed by Jack Conway. We both watched this on YouTube. I know because I talked to you yesterday about it.
Yep.
Was 115 minutes, starred Fay Ray as Teresa, Wallace Beery as Pancho Villa, Henry B. Walthall as Francisco Madero, and Stuart Irwin as Johnny Sykes, a reporter. This was nominated 4 times, and it won once. It was nominated for writing. It was nominated for Best Picture. It was nominated for sound, and it was nominated for Assistant Director. And it won Best Assistant Director. John Waters. Didn't realize he was operating in 1934, but good job. Viva Villa is a 1934 American pre-code film about Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa. The screenplay was written by Ben Hecht, adapted from the 1933 book Viva Villa by Edgecombe Pynchon and Obi Stade. The film was shot on location in Mexico and produced by David Selznick. There was uncredited assistance with the script by Howard Hawks, James Kevin McGinnis, and Howard Emmett Rogers. Hawks and William Wellman were also uncredited directors on the film. There was a lot of problems in getting this movie made, and so the directors changed over a bunch before Jack Conway ended up with it. All right, I'm going to read the synopsis on this one, Sarah, okay?
Yes.
Take a drink of water. After seeing his poor father lose his hand and be whipped to death for protesting, young Pancho Villa stabs one of the killers, then heads off into the hills of Chihuahua, Mexico during the 1880s. As a grown man, Villa and a band of rebel bandits, including his trusty ally, Sierra, kill wealthy landowners and become heroes to their fellow peons. These are the words used in the movie. A wealthy aristocrat, Don Felipe, arranges an introduction for Villa to the distinguished and eloquent Francisco Madero, who resents what has become of Mexico under the rule of President Porfirio Diaz and persuades Villa to help him fight for liberty, not just for personal gain. The coarse and illiterate Villa is humbled in the presence of Madero and agrees to fight for his cause. He's also attracted to Don Felipe's beautiful sister Teresa, although there are many women in Villa's life. And I would like to add, most of them were raped. Villa's exploits are made even more colorful by an American newspaper reporter, Johnny Sykes, to whom Villa has taken a great liking. Villa wins a bunch of battles. Madero ultimately assumes office in Mexico City and then commands Villa to disband his army. Villa agrees, but when Sierra kills a bank teller just so Villa can withdraw money, Villa is sentenced to death. A gloating General Pascal mocks the way Villa pleads for his life, then reads a telegram from Madero ordering Villa is to be exiled and not killed. Alone and drunk in El Paso, Texas, Villa is visited by his reporter Buddy, who informs him that Madero has been assassinated. Villa returns to Mexico, rebuilds his army, recruits tens of thousands, and together they storm the capital, where Pascal is subjected to a particularly gruesome death. After that, Villa assaults Teresa, who shoots him in return, only to then be shot by Villa's BFF, Sierra. Villa appoints himself president, but is ineffectual, unable to restore Madero's dream of land reform for the poor. He agrees to step aside and go back to where he belongs, to his wife. But before he can, he's gunned down. End of story. Sarah.
Okay.
What'd you think of this movie?
If it was not meant to be a historical movie, maybe I could have liked it in some way. It's just that the people who made this movie didn't have a lot of respect for Pancho Villa, and it shows. Pancho Villa was not illiterate. He was basically literate, which is different. What kind of movie is it meant to be? It's meant to be like a Western, basically.
It's
except
a prototype, kind of early Western, yeah.
Pre or post Hays Code?
This is still pre.
Yeah, because it's not clear that this is meant to be a good guy or a bad guy, is it?
Wallace Beery, who in this role, has made a name for himself playing these kind of complicated bad guy with a heart of gold, maybe.
He was like that in real life. Did you read about Wallace Beery?
Yeah. In one of the last, actually in 2 Golden Boys, I think I talked about where he spit on young, was it Ray Bradbury, who asked him for an autograph when he was a child. Child actors he worked with, he would like upstage or make a noise or something when they were giving their line during a close-up, so the close-up couldn't be used. Like, he was really not a generous actor to work with.
I don't know that, but he was married to Gloria Swanson when she was 17, which is so ridiculous to me because that's such a beautiful woman. Or in her autobiography, she talks about how he raped her. And so he was basically the same person in real life that he was playing in this movie, this kind of gruff character. I read another thing where he was involved in somehow one of the creators of the Three Stooges got into a bar fight with him and he was suspected of having killed him.
I read that, yeah.
Yeah, so he is that kind of person. They really go over the top in making the point that this guy is unsophisticated, proud, like he doesn't have a complicated intellectual life. Part of the movie that's really interesting is that the newspaper reporter reports that he attacked somewhere he hasn't attacked, and then he's like, okay, for you we will attack it, and then he says, well, it's impossible to come in from the south, and he's like, well, that's where I wrote you came in from, and he's like, okay, for you we will attack from the south. The best scene in this movie is where they're all kind of on the train and going towards their destination and writing Viva Villa. Like, this is my drawing of the train, of the front of the train with the Viva Villa on it, because in every single movie at this point I'm waiting for the moment where they explain what the title of the movie means, right? And this one, I didn't think I would have such a visual shot of them being like, they all climb on top of this train and they're riding on top of it and they're getting ready to. He's been chastised by Madero at that point for being more of a bandit than a soldier, because a soldier follows orders and a bandit just kills people. And that's the whole thing, is that he's very indelicate throughout the whole movie, right?
This is something that you would never get post Hays Code. You got this guy who's essentially assaulting every woman he meets in the movie. He's a sadist. The way he kills his enemy at the end, just horrific. They don't show it, luckily, but I'm sure they wanted to show it, the directors, guy tied to the ground and being eaten alive with ants as his body's covered in honey, or his eyes and nose and ears.
Yep. Even that part where they kill the bank teller and then he gets arrested and he's like, but I told you I'm sorry. Like, he doesn't understand basic morality. Like, they're making an overblown point about his experience as a child watching his father be killed in the film.
There's no depth at all to that. It's like his father died, so he just became an a-hole, and that's it, But
not just his father died. In the beginning of the movie, it's a bunch of people who showed up and they're just like, all of your stuff now belongs to the rich people. And that's what Peon was actually a historical word. They're not just calling them peons to be derogatory. It's actually a historical word for agricultural workers that worked for landlords.
Oh, okay. I
So
wasn't sure because I didn't do a lot of research and I totally.
this movie doesn't make you want to do research. It doesn't, because you just know that whatever is going on in it, it's not what happened. The way that they portray this guy is so offensive. The reason that he fails at governing is because he can't read. He doesn't understand inflation and why if you print money, it's not worth anything. Like, he's a really uncomplicated simpleton. The conflict in this movie is between him and the Madero character, who's like trying to gentrify him, gentleize him, make him a force for good when he's just a force for chaos. He's not really a force for good.
I do appreciate the pre-code element. I appreciate that you're not going to see too many characters like this going forward. And I do think there's something in that type of character, right? Because like Scorsese's made all of his life off characters like this, like Goodfellas, like these horrible people doing horrible things, yet we, the audience, are meant to root for them and sympathize with them. Like, for some reason, you're like, yeah, Wallace Beery, I want you to take that town because the reporter wrote it in his story. But at the same time, I'm like, wait a minute, how many people are dying? Like, what's he doing to the people? Even the banker thing, it's like he just freed it. He's settling down. This banker could have been fighting in his army like a year earlier. And now he's just asking him to, oh, I'm closing, you can't take money. And he doesn't feel sympathy that I killed one of the guys.
Laws, no laws, no rules. I can't deal with it. Show him as being very callous and just being like, okay, we will take the money. Like, he doesn't feel remorse at the killing at all. And that's the part of him that really you can't get with. So in terms of some of the historic things that were true, Pancho Villa was married multiple times. He did not follow the kind of direct line of marrying one person and sticking with that. That part about the woman where she got killed, that was completely made up. This was another one of those, let's add that in to make it more interesting.
Spice it up.
A possible romance for this guy who's got so many romances already going.
With a woman who, there's no way, you look at the two of them together, you're like, no way she's into this guy. Like, how is this woman, this refined lady, interested in this guy who's this dirty killer who rapes all his other women, except for his wife? I mean, his wife he essentially raped too. She just forced him to marry her to make it okay, because he was going to sleep with her whether she wanted to or not. She just, was confident enough to be like, no, you're marrying me before we do this.
The other aspects of it that were kind of all over the place were like this thing about the pigeons and the bulls. In every scene, he's holding people at gunpoint, making them read to him.
Yeah.
And they make a really big thing in the movie about pigeons and bulls because he's, for some reason, friends with this artist, or this artist is always working with him. And every time he asks him to draw a bull, he draws pigeons instead, which I think are actually meant to be doves. Like, that must have done that just to piss him off, right? Like, because he knows, like, it's meant to be funny. It's not meant to be historical. So the other thing I want to say about this movie was that the way that he dies in the movie, it's just like a couple shooting him across the street. And in real life, he went into town and he usually traveled with a bunch of bodyguards, but he only had a few. And he was driving down the road and some guy just yelled, "Viva Villa!" when he was like driving past him. And then 30 people with shotguns came into the road and shot him, which is a way more cinematic scene than what they represented in the movie.
Especially them yelling the title of the movie. You'd think you'd want to get that scene in there.
Yeah.
Maybe they ran out of money at the end. They were like, we spent a lot of money on this action shots.
It had to do with the character that they were building, where he was like, oh, I have no more political aspirations, which is how Pancho Villa ended his life. He went from being a national figure to being more of a local figure. And so he went back to his hometown. But they kind of like castrated him in that way, where he was buying a nightgown and he was being vulnerable and he got killed. So that was a cinematic choice to show that when Pancho Villa was being vulnerable and kind to people, that's when they were able to kill him. I think that was a choice,
There wasn't enough in here where it's like, oh yeah, I need to watch this again, or I need to go tell people to go watch this. It's kind of
What number did you put it at?
This I have this one in the middle. I think I have this one at. I might have this as high as 6.
I put this at number 8.
Yeah, I actually put this. I put House of Rothschild right behind this, 7. I think my situation with that was just like there were points where I have to be like, wait, what am I missing? What is happening in this movie? He's getting alone now. He's going to, you know. Whereas in this movie, you're never like, oh, what's happening? What's going? Oh,
Yeah.
okay, he's killing that guy now. Oh, he's attacking this town. Oh,
Either he's doing good or he's bummed
yeah.
out. Like,
Or he's trying, or Madero is like getting like that was really the emotional relationship of the movie that they didn't spend a ton of time on. They had a couple scenes together where like he's treating him like he's his older brother, and it's the one guy in the movie that Via kind of looks up to a little and lets talk down to him,
yep.
But I feel like, yeah, maybe if you explored that a little more, but no, like midway through the movie, it's just like, yeah, you can't be around me. And then it's, oh, well, that's the most interesting relationship, though.
Right. Yep.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I agree in that sense, in the sense that the House of Rothschild was like most of these movies, I kind of read the synopsis beforehand just because I was like, I want to know what's going on when I'm getting into it, because I don't want to go in blind. Because reading the synopsis was like a guide to that movie where you're just like, here's what's going to happen. And then you're like, okay, generally this is what's happening.
yeah.
I don't know if I got quizzed on it, I'd be able to remember, but it was pretty dry in the sense that a lot of that was just political drama.
Well, that's why I didn't read the synopsis for House of Rothschild. I was like, people are going to turn the podcast off immediately. All right, you ready to move on?
I'm ready.
The Thin Man.
All right.
Came out May 25th, 1934. We're still in the pre-code. Directed by W.S. Van Dyke. I believe I saw this on Amazon. Sound right to you?
Yes.
I think we paid for this one. 91 minutes. Starred Myrna Loy as Nora Charles and William Powell as Nick Charles, the married couple of this movie. Also had Maureen O'Sullivan as Dorothy Wynant, the customer in this movie, and Nat Pendleton as Lieutenant John Guild, the police officer of this movie. This was nominated 4 times. It won none of them. For writing, adaptation, outstanding production, directing, and for Best Actor, William Powell was nominated. He lost to Clark Gable. Thin Man is a 1934 American pre-code comedy mystery film based on the 1934 novel of the same name by Dashiell Hammett. The film features a leisure class couple who enjoy copious drinking and flirtatious banter. Nick is a retired private detective who left his very successful career when he married Nora, a wealthy heiress accustomed to high society. Their wire-haired fox terrier, Asta, was played by canine actor Skippy. Hammett based Nick and Nora's banter upon his rocky on-again, off-again relationship with playwright Lillian Hellman. Have you read Dashiell Hammett?
I haven't read this book, but I read other books by him. I'm trying to think. When I was reading about this movie, they were saying that, Dashiell Hammett's usual is the hard-boiled detective, which is what you really like him for. Him and Raymond Chandler are the two best writers of that kind, but this was not that. This is a lighthearted series, and I'd be interested to see how it translates into literature, just in the sense that, like, the plot of this movie didn't make any sense. It really made very little sense, and the entirety of this movie was really about the dialogue between the two main characters.
So before we start, W.S. Van Dyke, who directed this movie, also directed a movie called Trader Horn, which I rank as one of the 2 worst movies I've had to watch for this entire project. It was very racist, set in Africa. So going into this movie, I was not excited in any way, shape, or form. But I think I agree with you. I think the relationship between Nick and Nora in this movie is, and it's similar in a way to It Happened One Night. It's like those 2 actors kind of make this movie. And the story, this complicated disappearance, is he murdered or not plot, is like so convoluted as to be ridiculous. Like, it's not
only that, he was very clearly murdered at the beginning of the movie. He was very clearly, he was murdered. There was not any doubt. I spent most of the movie being like, that guy's definitely dead. I don't know. And then they're like, oh, maybe we saw him. I was like, no, you didn't. He's murdered.
So let me read the synopsis, only because I think I wrote this one, or at least severely edited it from Wikipedia. So I'm gonna give you the heads up too. This is in my top four movies. It did make it up that high. So
It's in my top 4 as well.
synopsis. Dorothy Wynant is getting married and asks her eccentric father Clyde to walk her down the aisle. He agrees, but only after he comes back from a secret inventing trip. But before he can leave, he finds out his girlfriend, young secretary, stole 50,000 in bonds from him, and she had a mystery accomplice. Nick Charles is a retired detective and once did a job for Clyde. Nick and his wealthy wife Nora live in San Francisco, but are visiting New York City for Christmas, staying in a glamorous apartment-like suite at the Hotel Normandy. While in New York, Nick is pressed back into service by Dorothy as her father, the Thin Man of the movie title, has mysteriously disappeared. Will Nick take the case? As the police collect leads, Nick and Nora have a delightful time, flirting with each other while bodies stack up around them. But Nick takes the case, even though his scenes goofing off with Nora are much more fun. On a hunch, Nick visits Clyde's closed-up inventor shop in the dead of night, and with the help of his dog Asta, finds a body. The police assume that the remains belong to the Fat Man, a long-ago enemy of the Thin Man's, because of his oversized clothing and a belt buckle with an R. But Nick had this case figured out yesterday, and soon invites the full cast of suspects to an elegant dinner party. The plot gets laid out by Nick, and everybody is impressed, as it is very complicated. The real killer pulls a gun, but Nick socks him one in the kisser. Lights out! Finally, Nick and Nora, along with Dorothy and her new husband, Tommy, celebrate as they ride a luxury train back to California. Nora, in the lower bunk, wants to sleep with Asta, but Nick tosses Asta to the upper bunk and joins Nora himself. Asta looks down on the couple and covers his eyes with his paw. Who says marriage can't be fun? The end. Oh, I threw that paper and I need it. I think I'm Dave Leatherman here, chucking my cards behind me. All right, yeah. So Sarah, this movie, it's in your top 4?
Yeah, it's a hyper movie. It's high energy and the people don't stop talking and doing things.
It's weird. It's like a Sherlock Holmes kind of thing, like there's Sherlock and Watson.
He calls her Watson at some point. He says, "Come on, Dr. Watson." He said that. That was right after the Christmas scene. It is like there's Sherlock and Watson, except that he's trying to get rid of her constantly. Because there is that whole scene where he sends her to Grant's tomb in the car. And he is a non-committal detective. And she's always trying to push him back into it. But one of the quotes that I wrote down was, he said, "It's putting me way behind in my drinking." They're like Sherlock and Watson in the way that he's constantly bouncing things off of her, and she's always asking, "What do you think about this?"
Yeah, which is kind of an interesting, though, husband-wife relationship in a movie, especially considering I feel like most movies marriage is like a problem, whereas in this movie marriage is they're married and they're happy, and that's kind of unusual in a movie. And they flirt with each other constantly. Like, yeah, in the synopsis.
Is that what that is? It is a little bit, it's flirting, but it's antagonistic, like in It Happened One Night. I feel like the reason that this was nominated was because it's kind of got the same thing going as It Happened One Night. These two people have when I read the Roger Ebert review of this movie, he said that it was like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers of dialogue, in the way that their dialogue bounces back and forth and it's choreographed. At least It Happened One Night had a very straightforward plot. I think that's where this movie failed, was like, wait, what's going on? Why is that happening? The brother of the woman who's trying to get married, I was like, is he autistic? Because in no way does he ever seem upset that his father is dead, ever.
Yeah, he's totally, that character is not written at all. He just walks into rooms. Like,
yeah.
Says, what's my motivation for the scene? You enter the room, you're in it. Like, that's what else do you need? So that leads. Let me get into some of this directing style that Van Dyke does, because most of these takes in this movie apparently are like one takes. Like, this is Ed Wood filmmaking, which is weird because Ed Wood's bad, and this actually came out pretty good. But so for Powell's first scene in the movie, for Nick, Van Dyke told him to take the cocktail shaker, go to the bar, and just walk through the scene while the crew checks lights and sounds. So Powell does that, throwing in some lines and inventing some business of his own. And then suddenly Powell hears Van Dyke say, cut it, print it. The director just shot the scene without him knowing. And that's in the movie of him getting the shaker. And I do remember watching that scene and just being like, he seems so comfortable, like this guy in this character. And I think when they're filming you and you don't know, of course you are going to be as comfortable as possible. He didn't do cover for any of these shots. So he just shot, he felt the scene was right on the first take, reasoning that actors lose their fire if they have to do something over and over again. Very anti the flip side of the coin to a Stanley Kubrick, I guess. He paid the most attention to Powell and Loy's easy banter between takes and their obvious enjoyment of each other's company and worked it into the movie. The director often encouraged them to improvise and come up with off-the-cuff lines. That scene where he's shooting balloons off the tree was apparently him. He was doing that to annoy techies and stuff, people working on the film, and they just decided that's going into the movie. Although she had great compliments for Powell's charm and wit, Maureen O'Sullivan, who was the daughter of the missing man, later said she didn't enjoy making the picture because her part was so small and the production was rushed. And I can see any other actor who's not those two leads being so frustrated because they're probably like, they're doing these quick improvisations and by the time you're like, oh, the scene's shot, like I didn't even get to do anything, like your character is like not important.
I mean, that wasn't, none of the other actors make an impression on you, but I think the material they had to work with wasn't good.
Yeah.
Film adaptation was also written by a married couple. Like the film adaptation of the book was written by a married couple.
Oh, wow. So
yeah.
So there's that added level of realism, I guess, to assuming that couple had a good bantery relationship.
Tracking what this was nominated for, it was for charisma of the actors and maybe to some extent the director's ability to capture that in a really nice and natural way.
Yeah, their dialogue is so rapid fire.
Yeah, and there were some interesting things done with the lighting. Like, it was a very shadowy movie. When I was watching it, it was just like all these different shadows and like being cast everywhere. And I think that was meant to kind of add to the mystery, like what's happening in the shadows. Like, then there's the scene where he's sitting in the dark to catch the person coming into the building and he turns the light on because him and the dog are in the dark. The dog is great in the movie as well.
Yeah, I thought the mystery, as convoluted as it was, they did a good job of giving you a guy, the business partner at the beginning of the movie. And he's in like that one scene and you're like, oh, it's the business partner. He is the guy responsible for the whole movie. You're like that. And they do a good twist on it where, no, he had just gotten out of jail and he wanted to stay clean. He didn't want to be involved. And it was actually the lawyer who's been in the whole movie that was behind it. It just, to get there was such a chore. Like that dinner table scene, that was like probably the worst scene of the movie.
One of the guys shot him and he invited that guy he invited this guy to dinner at his house after he was shot by this guy. It was like, there are some really interesting quotes because Nunheim was one of the guys that you were meant to believe could have been a suspect. And Nunheim was being interviewed. I think it was him that was being interviewed in the apartment and he was dating some kind of lady and he said, you open your mouth and I'll pop a tooth out of it. That's what he said to her because I was tracking all the nasty things they said to her.
Oh, yeah.
But she had the great quote, I don't like crooks. And if I did like them, I wouldn't like crooks that are stool pigeons. And if I did like them, I still wouldn't like you. That was beautiful dialogue there.
Yeah.
So that was really the dissolution of that particular relationship. It was just a fun movie. That is what was likable about it.
I think you're right. I think people were just thinking in that it happened one night. Like this movie's very similar. This could be almost a copy, except they came out at the same time. Just like two studios, I guess, doing the same. Maybe he's rushing it to try and beat It Happened One Night coming out. Myrna Loy was supposed to play the Claudette Colbert role in It Happened One Night. Like she turned that role down, which is funny to then do the same movie.
They do the work of making the father seem kind of unlikable at the beginning of the movie. So you're like, who cares if this guy gets killed? Right? That's one thing about this movie it's like, it is about a murder of a family member, none of the family members seemed particularly broken up about it.
I thought he was good though. That I thought the movie was going to be about him. Like he was like I remember when he walked off screen, I think, and then I'm like, wait, he's dead, isn't he? Like he's not coming back into the movie. I do think it's interesting that this is another rich couple. She's an heiress. Is that what they said she was? How did she get her money? Wealthy heiress, accustomed to high society. So he's living off of her basically.
So this was the first of a series of.
Why did they keep calling it the Thin Man though? If the guy murdered in the first movie was the Thin Man.
I was tracking that because in each one of these movies, I was like, why is it called this? And then there is a quote in the movie where they say every thin man with white hair is whining. So because they saw another thin man with white hair that wasn't whining. Thin Man moniker was thought by many viewers to refer to Nick Charles, and after a time it was used in the titles of sequels as if referring to Charles. Was it just they switched it? They switched it to refer to Nick Charles rather than
yeah, because you don't want to rename the movie and you got to bank on that name.
I honestly would have watched all the sequels to this and did a full report for this, but I had to watch.
You had to watch Here Comes the Navy.
Yeah. So what movie are we doing next?
Here Comes the Navy came out July 20th, 1934. Technically post-code, but, you know, the movie's already been made at this point. Director Lloyd Bacon. I saw this on Amazon. I even wrote down that I paid $2.89 to watch this movie. That to my eternal dissatisfaction. Length 87 minutes. Actress Gloria Stewart as Dorothy Dot Martin. Actor James Cagney as Chester Chesty O'Connor. And actor Pat O'Brien as Chief Petty Officer William Biff Martin. Pat O'Brien we will see later in the other military movie as well, Flirtation Walk. This was nominated one time for Best Picture. Didn't win. Here Comes the Navy, also known as Hey Sailor, is a 1934 American romantic comedy written by Earl Baldwin and Ben Markson. With the full cooperation of the U.S. Navy, principal photography, which ended early May 1934, took place at a number of naval facilities, including the Bremerton Navy Yard, Washington Naval Training Station, San Diego, California, as well as other locations in San Pedro and Sunnyvale, California. Naval personnel made up many of the extras in the film. Of historical interest, I'll save that part because I know you're going to want to talk about that later. When America entered the First World War in 1917, Lloyd Bacon, the director, enlisted in the United States Navy and was assigned to the photographic department. Many of his later films as a director harked back fondly to his time in the Navy. So I will say, as a positive, this is a movie about the military, made by a person who was in the military. I feel like that is more important than these people who romanticize the military, and they never were in it.
Can I read my synopsis?
Oh, you have a synopsis?
Yeah, it's my own personal synopsis.
Okay, of course I want to hear it. Shoot.
A man who has no respect for anything joins the Navy and marries a nice lady to seemingly just get back at some guy he got into a street fight with. He insults everyone in the Navy, but somehow gets promoted above and marries the guy's sister. That's my synopsis of the movie.
Sarah, this is the weird thing, and this is kind of what you said at the beginning. I feel like these movies, this one has a patriotic element. I think it wants you to join the Navy, but it also gives you a protagonist that wants to desert and has complete disdain for the Navy. So it's like weirdly at odds with itself. Like, am I supposed to relate to this guy? Because I don't. And, you know, do I want to join the Navy after seeing this? Not really.
I mean, it has this really kind of neat thing at the beginning where they show all of the characters with their character names below them. Like it's like a comic strip or something, like they explain. And his name is Chesty, which apparently was at that time a good way to call someone who was named Chester by a nickname. I think James Cagney really got frustrated by playing villains, but he's not a really great hero in this movie. What's the other guy's name?
Pat. I did that thing where I threw my paper again. Pat O'Brien is Biff. Yeah.
Biff Martin. He really just doesn't like this guy, and that is the only reason he joins the Navy. Like, he really thinks it through amount zero.
Yeah.
Like, he starts the movie by making fun of the Navy. He's a riveter on the docks, and he sees this Biff walking by, and he starts calling out commands, and then everyone's listening to him, and he thinks it's hilarious. Story goes on, and there's a party that night where they have like the dance, and he's supposed to be like, the award is named after him because he's so good at dancing. And then he gets into the fight outside, and then Biff ends up winning this award.
And his girlfriend.
Yeah, when he's fighting with his girlfriend, he's not like, there's no sense of like, I care about this woman. The entire argument is like, oh, well, he's so great, whatever. I'm going to show you. And it's more fighting. This guy has no level of like self-reflection.
Yeah, you're like, I'm going to do this thing and not realize, yeah, that's like, what, 4 years of my life. Like, just to get back at this guy over this one incident.
Right? Yeah.
You know? And you can't even successfully do it because even he thinks, oh, once I get on that boat, it's like, what's your plan? Like, because once he gets on the boat, the guy's just like, yeah, no, I'm in charge now. And you can't be acting like that. And he's like, like, I thought James Cagney's character was just reprehensible, like in his behavior towards every other character in this movie. He's so entitled, and I don't know what this movie wants us to think. Like, and I think that audiences at the time apparently liked him because this movie did pretty well. So maybe they thought that was funny, like him being such a jerk.
It comes up again, right? It does come up again because I feel like the guy at the beginning of Flirtation Walk is similar.
Yes.
Where he's just like, I don't take anything I'm doing seriously. Maybe I'm in the military, but I obviously don't respect you or anything about the military. I was surprised by how much cleaning up the Navy does to keep their ships nice. That was like the main thing. They're just like, it's just...
That's probably the realism. That's the director being like, that's all you do. You just sweep that like all day.
Yeah,
then you got to sit on the guns, right? And whether they polish them or something, I don't know.
He's so unheroic in this movie because there is the part where he's like manning the guns and he's shooting things, and then like a torpedo comes back in and he gets it out of there, and they're like, you saved everyone, and he says, I was just trying to save myself.
Yeah.
So unlikable. You are not rooting for him at all, but it doesn't matter because at every single step he's doing great. He's getting better. And when he is saying, I don't want to be in the Navy anymore, the guy, the main officers above Biff are like, yeah, he wants to move on. He wants to be in the Air Corps now. And they're like, he is a good soldier. And I'm like, according to who?
Yeah. He snuck off, and I mean, and that's it's funny that the most offensive thing in this movie is like one of the last things that comes to mind because this movie is just, to me, terrible. But he puts on blackface at one point to sneak past his nemesis of the movie, and apparently he's so convincing in this shoe polish that he's able to do it. I hate it. I hate that in 1934 they still think this is a funny joke. And it's one of the only times you see other black actors too around him, and they're giving him that frowning face. And
not just that. Like they show him talking to a black actor.
Oh yes,
he does it and being like, "Can you help me do this?" And the level of mental capacity they show this actor as having, it's like he wouldn't be on the ship. He would be like in some kind of home. That part was just one of the worst parts. But then
when we talk about racism in movies, like, and you apologize for some stuff, like in a movie like Shanghai Express where someone's got yellow face, but the movie itself isn't inherently racist. This movie is inherently racist. This uses race for humor, not to humanize these characters or to create believable characters. They're fake characters. It's supposed to be a joke. And I think if you think that's funny in 2023, like, we're probably not going to...
Not only that, the only joke is that he's black. It doesn't go beyond that. Like, it's not like black people do this. It's just like, this guy's black, this guy's stupid, and this guy's dressing up as black, and people are believing it. Isn't it funny to be black? Yeah. That's the whole joke. Like, then he goes and meets with this lady, and she, like, everything that happens from there, it's just really annoying. Because why, at the point where he runs away from the Navy to meet her, when she's from this family where her brother is such a respected naval person, is she like, yeah, I'm still kind of into this guy or whatever, like, why is she still into him?
Yeah, he's nothing but a jerk to her. And then like the second time she sees him, he shows up in blackface. And you think like, if that's like your second or third date with someone and they rush up to you in blackface, I'm probably like, yeah, this ain't gonna work.
No, because this is another one of those movies where these people, like, I have no idea how much time has passed in this movie. I wrote, how much time has passed in this movie? Several days, a week, a few months. They showed night of him going to sleep and then waking up, and then you're just like, what day is this? How is this woman? Is this woman in love with him after a couple of days? Which I think is what it is, but he just rocketed through the ranks of the Navy to the Air Corps, which I noted that the Air Force was founded in 1947. So this is like
13 years earlier.
They were still kind of working on airplanes. And then, so the other point is his best friend joins him, and his best friend is always trying to borrow money for his mom's dentures, and he asks him to borrow $20, right? Which to you now sounds reasonable. And I looked it up, and $20 in 1934 is equal to $449.69 now. So that's a pretty big ask, I think.
And he's just carrying that around in his pocket at all time. Sarah, can we this movie is so bad that we could talk about it forever. Can we talk for a minute about the one thing that you said you liked about the movie? Because I think that's the only thing of interest in this movie.
Well, that they were flying dirigibles. That I looked up the whole history of dirigibles, and I mean, that was the only thing that was exciting about the movie, was when they say they're going to join the Air Corps, and then they show them flying this gigantic blimp, which is absolutely the opposite of what you would think of in terms of the Air Force, like sleek and fast and powerful. Yeah. Now, I think that the way that the blimps worked was that they deployed planes from the air, but in any case, they were a disaster. They were as disastrous as the Hindenburg. They were about the size of the Hindenburg. I mean, you could read up more about them. That one was called the Macon. The warship that they are shown on
Arizona
was destroyed during Pearl Harbor.
That's the interesting thing in this movie, is that they are filming on these two historical ships. They're actually on the Arizona. They're actually in the dirigible Macon, and the Macon's destroyed a year later, and the Arizona's destroyed like 7 years later during Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
So like it's almost like a weird historical record of those things.
Yeah.
Just sad that James Cagney is doing antics on them.
Because we also saw in the other movie the autogyro, so we're seeing this interesting era of air development. like that's the most visually depicted thing that was very interesting, just to see the way the men kind of manned this dirigible as if it was a ship. They called it an airship, right? And then
the rope thing where the guy gets pulled up, I'd read that was a situation, something like that had actually happened. Like that's how the director had thought to put that in there, which is arguably the most interesting. Although I thought it was silly watching it, but it's the most interesting part, I think, of the movie, of like, his nemesis stupidly hanging onto a rope as it pulls him miles into the air.
I feel like that was supposed to redeem him in our eyes, to be like, oh, he's helping this guy even though they're nemesis, but
he disobeyed orders.
It didn't endear me to him because he was just a bigger jerk about it in the future. Like he didn't,
Well, it's like he got his revenge. The movie started and he's like, I'm going to get this guy by the end, and he does. And you're like, I didn't want that. Yeah,
because during his wedding, he's promoted above that guy.
Yeah.
For what reason? I don't know. For saving that guy is supposedly the reason.
Not only is this movie my worst movie that we had to watch this time, this is, in 55 movies I've watched so far for this show, this ranks third to the bottom. And the only reason it's not last is because there are two movies that killed a bunch of animals in it, and I can't support them. So no animals were murdered in Here Comes the Navy. But boy,
just because James Cagney as a character is very unlikable in this movie.
You don't want to, I wanted to turn it off so many times. I'm like, I have to finish this movie.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Cleopatra came out August 16th, 1934. That's when it premiered in New York City. Director, Cecil B. DeMille. This one, completely unavailable. I had to buy a $10.99 DVD version of it, which I then loaned to you.
Yeah.
Length, 100 minutes. Stars Claudette Colbert as Cleopatra, William Warren as Julius Caesar, and Henry Wilcoxon as Mark Antony. This was nominated 5 times and won once. It was nominated for film editing, nominated for assistant director, best picture, sound recording, and cinematography, for which it won. Cleopatra is a 1934 American epic film retelling the story of Cleopatra the Seventh of Egypt. Screenplay was written by Waldemar Young and Vincent Lawrence. It was based on Bartlett Cormack's adaptation of historical material. The shoot was a difficult one due to Colbert contracting appendicitis on the set of her previous film. Four Frightened People, not It Happened One Night, leaving her only able to stand for a few minutes at a time. Heavy costumes complicated matters further. As we mentioned at the start, on July 1st, 1934, the Motion Picture Production Code went into effect, enforced by Joseph Breen. DeMille was able to get away with using more risque imagery than he would be able to do in later productions. He opens the film with an apparently naked but strategically lit slave girl holding up an incense burner in each hand as the title appears on screen. The film is also memorable for sumptuous Art Deco look of its sets by Hans Dreyer and costumes by Travis Banton. The atmospheric music composed by Rudolph Kopp, and for DeMille's legendary set piece of Cleopatra's seduction of Antony. Oh, that's what the film's known for. Some of that music's been reused, especially the kind of Egyptian theme music. I feel like Indiana Jones has used that music. You know, the scene where she's coming in on the barge to Rome, they're playing like this kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but it makes you immediately think of Egypt. And that's been used, I think, ad nauseum, which is why my brain's like, yeah, that works.
It's got a certain, like, instrument that I want to say it's like a clarinet or something, or it's that snake charmer type thing.
Like, apparently, I watched a little bit of a documentary on this Cecil B. DeMille making of it, and he really wanted like authentic instruments from the time to be more front and center. He certainly used a full orchestra, but he wanted them to focus on using like these older instruments, which maybe that's part of what makes it work. The soundtrack I thought was pretty good for this movie.
Very good. It's one of my favorite things about it. I would say, in terms of what I'm tracking for movies, I would say the reason this won was cinematography, because there are just some really beautiful shots that were obviously, when you read about Cecil B. DeMille's legacy, people really felt like he was a hack in some respects, but really he was excellent at building really beautiful scenes, and that's what the most impressive things about this movie were.
The costumes, like we talked about in past Golden Boys, like they did Henry VIII, and I was like, this looks like community theater, Shakespeare costumes. And this movie, like the costumes were beautiful. They were so elaborate and
got
cool.
So many hat drawings from this one. Just like,
I can't wait to see them. The hats were fantastic.
3 or 4 different hats. I didn't draw all of them, but she did wear a cobra a lot on her the top of her head, which is pictured in the cover. That is a hat she wore at one point. That's pictured there. Yeah. This is another one that she wore that I drew, which was just kind of like that kind of stuff coming off of it was feathers. She had kind of white feathers.
Oh yeah, it looked like she was wearing a wig on her hair.
And then this is a really cool one that she had that had like wings coming down over her ears.
Oh, that was so cool.
That's a good preview. I mean, the biggest thing that I wrote about this movie was the dialogue was the reason that people didn't like this movie. It had a theme that has come up in other movies in this year, which is you can't fall in love or it'll interfere with your job. Like that was the main. This movie was really particularly anti-woman. Instead of her using her charm to get political stuff done, basically she gets in here and she just gets into these Roman rulers and messes up their careers. That's basically what happens in this movie. There are a couple of guys who are warning throughout it. Here's a quote. "I don't hate women for nothing." That is a quote from the movie. So obviously it's not done it's done in a very true to the 1930s dialogue. It's a very casual dialogue. Here's another quote about women: they can't think and they can't fight, they're just playthings for us. That's another quote about women.
That's Mark Antony. Yeah.
Did you like that one?
I like this movie. I thought Claudette Colbert as Cleopatra was playing an interesting role where, and this was something else pre-code, of women using sexuality as a to an advantage. Men have always used violence to get advantages in movies, and that's something that they never had a problem letting continue past the pre-code. But women using their sexuality to advance themselves was immediately like, no, this is not a good thing. They need to just try hard and do their best. And so her seduction of Caesar and seduction of Mark Antony, I feel like is her using her natural abilities, and it's very manipulative of her in a way that I like. The very beginning, she's like, how old is this Caesar? Like she right from the go is like, yeah, I'm going to try and make a move on him, sight unseen. And Mark Antony on the barge, she's basically like, what's this guy's deal? I got to figure out how to woo
At the end
him.
of the movie, she kills herself for him. She decides to not. I mean, I guess she figures she's screwed anyway, because
That's actually my criticism of the movie, is that she could have escaped. They offered her an escape route and she chose to. Maybe she didn't have that advisor. Like I was tracking, like, where did this advisor go? Like he's with her all the way through Caesar, and he's like, he didn't love you. Caesar didn't love you. He's just after the money. She needed him at the end to be like, yeah, Mark Antony was a dummy. He was a dumbbell, and you'll find another person. Like, let's just get out the back gates.
She doesn't really have any political aspirations. She's shown partying and getting down, and really the downfall of Mark Antony is that he goes to her hangout where they sing and dance and drink all the time, and he just gets into loving. That is the downfall of Mark Antony. And that's that if I really had to track what the point of this movie was, that was it. With the quotes that they're saying about women, it's not a pro-woman movie. They may be putting her in a positive light, but in the end, she's just chilling. She's having a great time. People are dancing around and drinking. They're not doing work. They're not trying to overtake the world like Rome is. So,
I can excuse the barge thing because she's intentionally seducing him. But you're right. When they do get back to Egypt, they're just showing she's lounging and Mark Antony's drinking. And then they get King Herod shows up and she's like, I got to go deal with this, instead of actually doing any ruling in Egypt. So we don't see her in her role as queen necessarily. And that's probably to the detriment of the movie for sure. But I think the movie does too much jumping through time. Like half the movie's Caesar, half the movie's Mark Antony. I think it would have been a better movie if they just picked one of those guys and was like, that's the movie.
Yeah, like when you're talking about Kubrick, I think some of the scenes that are set up when they're showing, like, it's completely symmetrical and beautiful. I'm like, this is influential visually. Claudette Colbert did an excellent job being a different character. Having seen her in so many movies and then watching Imitation of Life after this, I was like, oh, she is really able to step into the characters she's playing. But the only things that I wrote that were exciting about this movie were finally the men get to wear flashy outfits.
Caesar's cape was outstanding. It was like Batman's cape. Like the way he'd whip that around the folds, I was like, that is so cool. It does not look cheap or like a theater production companies.
Here's a quote from The New Yorker. It called the dialogue the worst I have ever seen in the talkies. The moment that I really was aware that the dialogue in this movie was not up to snuff was when they were killing Caesar and he yells, "You too, Brutus!" That was the part where I was like,
that scene was shot so well too. Like that was one of the rare where they actually did go to close-ups, and you get that close-up of the guys first coming at him with the knives and then Caesar like backed into the corner. Like I thought that was shot really cool. But I thought Brutus was, if you don't know anything about Julius Caesar and you are coming into this movie totally cold, you've got to be like, who is this Brutus guy, right? They don't build him up, and Caesar never has a scene with him, so you never know they're friends just from the movie.
he's a cranky old man, right?
So him saying like "you too, Brutus," like in the context of just the movie, is like, how would you know what that means?
So the other thing that I kind of noted in the party before they meet Cleopatra, and they're like gossiping, they're like, oh, Caesar's real into Cleopatra, and one lady goes, is she black? And they all go, ha 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 ha, right? That's hilarious to them. But if you watch the scenes of dancing, a lot of the Egyptian people are portrayed as black. All the men in the kind of like background roles are portrayed as black.
The slaves, particularly, yeah.
Yeah, all the women are white women wearing black wigs. That is what I think the problematic aspect of this that would make it so that they don't want to release this, because I think that aspect of depicting Egypt in this way. I'm sure there are plenty of other movies, but if I were to think about why this movie, with all of the great cinematography, was not put into the popular culture, I would say it's that, because it's really just a glaring misstep. That was the part that I was like skeptical about in relationship to Egypt, you know, like making allusions to that people from Egypt were black and then treating it in this kind of uneven way. The cinematography is the best thing about this movie. I don't think the story, I don't know if they historically handle it that well. I don't think that their interpretation of it is the most interesting interpretation of it. Cleopatra is similar to Pancho Villa in the sense that there's some kind of folklore around her and the way that she appears. In terms of what they were trying to tell you about Cleopatra in this movie, what did you feel like they were trying to tell you about her?
I felt like they were trying to present a strong woman in an impossible situation. She had 3 goals in the movie, which I felt like for a lead actress at this time was great. One is self-preservation. We're presented with her and she's going to be killed, like they're threatening to kill her. The second is to rule Egypt, which, is arguably less dealt with, but it does come up when, Caesar's killed, and it's like you have these obligations to behave like a queen. And the third one is her trying to be a regular person, in a sense, like by letting herself be in love with these guys, like, or tricking herself into thinking that it is love, or maybe just by having them around enough, especially Mark Antony, like, okay, he's around, he's really likes me, he's like a dog to me the way his 2 dogs were to him, and that's cute and I like him. Like, I felt like those were all interesting elements, and I did feel like she had enough power until she came up against Octavius at the end, who was just like, I'm having nothing to do with women. And all the women haters are basically united at the end. The big beard guy and the other one, they're like, nope, we're not getting fooled by you. I'm not going on your barge, And then she's like, I'm out of tricks at this point. So I do appreciate her role, but I do also feel like the movie kind of meanders and doesn't feel like Via Via. I didn't sit there thinking, well, this has got to be how it actually happened.
No way, right?
Yeah.
But I think I like your interpretation of it. I did feel that way for the most part, but kind of played her a little bit too much. Like, they didn't show her doing a lot of strong things.
I liked the guy playing Caesar, William Warren. He had some bad dialogue, but his deliveries were like the way he would just say, well, who talks like that? Like, but he did it in such a weird, powerful, like convincing voice that I think someone on the commentary said, of all the casting in the movie, he looks exactly like Julius Caesar on the old coins.
Right. That is something I looked up, because that's what you do. Because I sent you the picture of Cleopatra of what she supposedly really looked like.
Yeah, a little darker than Claudette Colbert.
And this movie starts the tradition of something I really like about these movies from the 1930s, which is when they film something with someone in the foreground and a movie playing in the background. I love that effect. You'll see in more of the movies coming up, I made way more notes of like scenes where people were acting obviously in front of a movie screen.
Well, specifically driving car scenes, like I've seen that a lot, where you're in the car and that background is just that, like,
I love
whoa,
that.
we're crashing.
Imitation of Life does that. Flirtation Walk does that.
The movie we hated does that. Here Comes the Navy did a lot of that, where they're walking and there's like military stuff going on in the background and they're just walking.
I think that's so artistically interesting. It's not necessarily very accurate,
Yeah.
but artistically it just looks so neat to me.
I think the thing with this guy, Cecil B. DeMille, and this is the only movie of his I've ever seen, but I've read a lot about him afterwards, is like this is the guy who basically founded Hollywood. He went to Hollywood. He was like, this is a great spot to film. He was trying to get the hell away from Thomas Edison, who I have read had a bunch of thugs in New York, and they were just like bullying and beating people up and possibly murdering people to
Thomas
run
Edison
their movie ring.
is the one who electrocuted elephants, right?
Yeah. So he wanted to get the hell away from that, went to California and set up in Hollywood. And, obviously Hollywood is growing from there. But I feel like for a guy who started during the silent era and started Hollywood, like this feels so like he grows. Like he's not filming movies the same way. Like he's doing this very modern film making that is still, like you said, Stanley Kubrick's movies look like that.
This is a big budget picture. They've spent a lot of money on the set, on the costumes. When you're looking at each one of these movies, that's what I'm looking at, is like, what's the standout aspect? Which is interesting because one of the movies, the next movie we're going to talk about, One Night of Love, outstanding aspect of that movie is that it was nominated for and won a sound award. The sound was spectacular in that. It's about singing, and that's what's good in it, and very little else.
Okay, what am I going to say? Save that. One Night of Love came out September 5th, 1934, directed by Victor Schertzinger. I saw this on Amazon Prime for free. It's probably the best available way to watch a movie for such a weird movie. Is that how you did this?
Yeah, I believe so. If I paid for a movie and I don't like it, I'm usually disappointed. So more inclined to like a movie if it's not, if it's free.
Yeah. Oh, you must love this movie. Let's get to it. Length, 83 minutes. Stars Grace Moore as Mary Barrett. I also wrote down Tullio Carminati as Giulio Monteverdi, who's her mentor in this movie. Nominated 6 times. Nominated for Best Film, nominated for Film Editing, nominated for Actress. Grace Moore was nominated against Norma Shearer and Claudette Colbert. Nominated for Directing. Nominated for Music, the scoring, 1. Nominated for Sound Recording, as you mentioned earlier, 1. And I think it got a special Oscar for the sound too, right? One Night of Love is a 1934 American Columbia Pictures romantic musical film set in the opera world, adapted from the story Don't Fall in Love by Charles Behan and Dorothy Spear. Oh, here we go. One Night of Love received an Academy Scientific and Technical Award for its innovative use of vertical cut recording. Sarah, I don't know what those words mean. Do you have any insight?
So vertical cut recording process is an early method of audio recording by which a stylus cuts a vertical, compared to horizontal, groove into a phonograph record. This is in contrast to the lateral recording system, which uses a stylus that cuts side to side. In examining a vertically cut groove along its length reveals a continuous wavy line as the needle cuts at different depths according to the tone and loudness of the audio being recorded. So,
I feel like if I'm in the Academy and someone's like, we need to give them an Oscar for this, I'm just listening to them and like, okay, you say so.
Yeah,
sounds impressive.
But, I mean, I guess what they're talking about is something that allows them to kind of more finely capture tone and loudness or quietness of a sound.
Yeah, which for this movie where you're doing opera is probably like important because you're hitting the high C's, I guess, and you want to capture that accurately.
Exactly.
Moore's recording and performance of the Un Bel Di aria from Madame Butterfly did not go smoothly, as she had trouble hitting the high notes. According to a later biography, she flew into a rage and blamed the orchestra. However, when studio boss Harry Cohen asked Columbia music director Maurice Stoloff what the problem was, Stoloff replied, "There's nothing wrong with the orchestra. These are the original Puccini orchestrations." Moore was then told that either she went back to the recording stage or she would be responsible for paying the day's salary for the entire orchestra, and she returned and recorded her song. Synopsis. Opera singer Mary Barrett leaves her family to study music in Milan. Mary gets a job at the Cafe Roma, where Giulio Monteverdi, a famous vocal coach, hears her sing. Giulio promises to make Mary a star if she will allow him to control her life. He also tells her that there cannot be any romance between the two of them, as that would ruin everything. Mary discovers she has stage fright as she prepares for a tour of provincial opera houses. However, Giulio helps her to overcome it. Years later, still under Giulio's tutelage, Mary begins to tire of his dominance and discipline. The two meet one of Giulio's old pupils, Lally, while in Vienna. Lally used to bang Monteverdi, and it ruined their teacher-pupil relationship, if you can believe it. This past history renders Mary jealous, and she pretends to have laryngitis, as the script sabotages her entire character up until this point. Mary thinks Giulio has gone to Lally to rekindle a romance, and so visits Bill Houston, a longtime friend-zoner who has proposed marriage. In a jealous huff, Mary decides to string Bill along and not sing that night in order to punish Giulio. Giulio realizes what is going on and tells Mary that Lally will replace her on stage, but then proposes to Mary. What a twist. She decides to go on, and Mary's performance of Bizet's Carmen wins her an invitation to the Metropolitan Opera, her dream venue. Giulio, however, still does not believe that she is ready for such a venue. Later at dinner, Lally lies to Mary by telling her that she is still involved with Giulio. Mary bolts for New York City after that. On the night of her debut in Madame Butterfly, Mary is too nervous to go on stage, until she sees Giulio in the usual place in the prompter's box. Oh, she still does love him, said somebody, I guess. The end. That was all Wikipedia, actually. That wasn't me at all.
Even the part about banging her? Because I thought that was a little
straight from Wikipedia. That was straight from Wikipedia.
Casual, very casual. Oh. So obviously this movie thematically fits within the category of Don't Fall in Love. I mean, I think the original title of this was like Don't Fall in Love or something similar. And it's just, they say it a lot of times in the movie. They kind of interchangeably use falling in love and hooking up in movies at this time, so maybe I'd be interested to see where more of a distinction comes in from there. Like, because I think sometimes they're saying falling in love when they really mean don't hook up with your teacher.
Because he's not in love with his student Lally. Right from the first scene he's in with her, he's dismissive of her. He's like, "You'll still be beautiful tomorrow," which is kind of a crappy thing to say to.
Partially, I think that in the context of this movie, the reason he's like that is because she's not subservient to him. He's looking to, I mean, this comes up with a major theme, which is maybe related to your Taming of the Shrew theme, which is the celebration of jerks. The celebration of jerks in these movies. And he is an important jerk. So he's mean to people. He's not fun to be around. And that's just in the service of getting work done. Like the father in the Thin Man movie was like that, where it's like he's mean, but he's got a purpose. And that's the point of it, right? Like,
I was liking this movie. The scene at the beginning where she goes to Italy and they have like a Disney style song where she goes on the balcony and all the people come out with their instruments. The kids are out and they're all singing the song. I was thinking, oh, this might be a very delightful movie. Like, it's kind of got this fantasy element to it. It's kind of fun. I think right after that scene, when we start dealing with this teacher, it was done.
The plot point that I thought was very confusing about this movie, so much that I had to go back and watch the beginning of it, was that it opens with a scene of them doing the American radio auditions.
Right.
Winner is supposed to work with Giulio Monteverdi, right?
Oh, yeah, this is good. I love where you're going with this because I totally agree. Continue.
So then she's there and she's singing in a cafe because she has to, because she needs to work, and she's trying to scam her landlady and they don't want to pay rent. They just want to hang out and sing all the time. That's fun for them. And she's singing in the cafe, and Giulio Monteverdi sees her, and he's like, "Oh, please, I want to. You lost the contest." He doesn't know about that. He's like, "I just want to work with you. I think you'll be excellent." Then he says a bunch of insulting stuff to her to make her know that she needs him to be good. But I'm like, isn't he supposed to be working with another student?
Yeah. like where is she?
Like, what happened to the winner of that contest? He dismissed her summarily. He was like, no, you are not attractive. You are not for me. You know,
he saw her in an off-screen thing and was like, oh, no. Not tutoring you. Yeah, because Lally, the girl he's with, is the girl he was with on the barge while the contest was taking place. So she couldn't have been the one to win it. That whole contest thing just
bothered me. I mean, I know it was supposed to be the reason that she went to Italy. The killer quote from that was when her mom says to her, "Italy," and she says, "Yes." And she says, "Why, that place is full of Italians."
Yeah.
That was killer.
Did you hate that when she becomes big towards the end, there's never a scene where she brings her parents back to see her perform, or any of her friends from Italy, like her roommates. She's like, "You're all gone to me. Like nobody comes back." And this is our sympathetic main character of the movie.
Well, but she doesn't need them. She needs this guy, right?
And this guy does all these tricks. I never sensed from the first time she sang in the cafe to when she's singing the show that she got better. I felt like she was exactly the same. Do you feel like
that's true? Yeah, that's that. I mean, but that's because the entire point of this movie was the musical productions. The performance at the end went on for so long. Like it just went on. And I don't understand how it got awards for the songs when aren't these songs taken from other operas?
Except maybe One Night of Love. I'd have to look it up, but
well, no, One Night of Love is probably that's the most exciting thing is like when you start a movie and it's very clear what the title is.
Yeah.
But what was the One Night of Love?
Yeah, this is another one of those it happened one night questions.
Yeah.
Which night was the One Night of Love? Couldn't even guess. All right, Sarah, I did a couple bullet points on this of my problems with this movie. Let me see what you think about this. I put Mary risks everything with her last $500 to go to Italy, train herself to follow her dream. Midway through the movie, I'm done singing because my mentor likes a girl. Does this not feel in character? Like, is this the same character that we start the movie with? Bill Houston, I put the boyfriend.
Yeah.
Conveniently dumping himself, like at the end. You know? Like
I wrote Bill is pretty chill about leaving. He's not torn up at all. I was
no, he's not. He walks in the room and dumps himself. Well,
he's like, hey, I don't really fit in with these people. You're gonna do great. Gotta go.
Gotta leave town. Sorry. I'm not. Here's the other thing. Like, I don't know opera and that part of theater that well, but Madame Butterfly, is it okay in the opera world for white actresses to play that character?
It is so okay in the opera world for that to happen that I thought I was like, maybe this is the Mikado, but I don't know that much about opera, but there's at least two where that happens. And that happened in Providence where they were doing the Mikado and it got protested for that reason.
Oh, really?
At this time, it was definitely okay. At the end, I wrote, the jerk loves her. She performs Carmen. This is not fully fleshed out in the sense this musical is stealing from Carmen. Because I read that it was a musical and I was like, it's not really a musical. It's just a lady singing. And then they built a movie around it. But things that were really interesting were like when she eats Melba toast. That was what I made notes about because Melba toast was actually created for Toast Melba is just plain toast. Because I was like, what is Melba toast? Toast Melba is just plain toast. It is named after Dame Nellie Melba, the stage name of an Australian opera singer, and was made for her by a chef who was also a big fan of her. And he also created Peach Melba for her because he was a fan. So that was a sly hint to opera world, right?
Oh.
So that was one thing. The other thing is that Madame Butterfly is actually an opera about a person who loves someone and then they marry someone else. So it fits nicely in the theme of the movie. I just think there were other parts of the plot that they didn't think out. There is some cleverness to it, but overall, the movie is really just about the singing. It's really not about anything else. It's about the sound production. It's about this lady being a great singer. It's not about the plot, because if you cared about plot, this is not the movie for you. She's a great singer.
Yes.
She sings wonderful. You know, you can even get into it. You can appreciate it no matter who you are. But if you're looking for things to make sense, it's a movie for people who
kind of movie.
like the opera, right? Yeah. But imagine you're a person who loves opera and you go and you see this woman with a great singing voice with this new sound technology. You love this movie.
Yeah.
You love this movie. And this is early enough in movies that they were still figuring out and being like, hey, you guys did a great job on the sound of this movie, right? Like,
it's interesting that you put it that way because, it's kind of like the Taylor Swift movie right now. Like, this is the way people in the Midwest can see Grace Moore without traveling to New York or to some fancy opera house to catch her. And she's doing the hits. So, like, if you're an opera fan and you live somewhere, rural, you get to see Carmen. You get to see Madame Butterfly. It's just
Yeah,
that those of us that watch movies for plot and like character development and
right. But the things that I like about movies, say like the places where you and I agree are the dialogue stuff, the performance stuff.
yeah,
The places where you and I don't agree are like Cleopatra, beautiful movie, bored the hell out of me because the dialogue wasn't any good, but you liked it because you thought it was beautiful. I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, it's beautiful. Take a picture. I'll take pieces of that movie, but as a whole, it's a historic story. We already know what happens to Cleopatra, and it ends this way, right?
Yeah.
Like, this particular movie is about the singing. You don't ever believe, like, when this guy that is her mentor says he's in love with her, I'm completely surprised. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Like, you showed no sign that you had any feelings for her because you were equally jerky throughout the entire movie. And he's such a jerk that is the major downfall of the 1934 movie milieu for me, is this celebration of jerks. Like, that was, if I had to, like,
That's the quote that goes on the top of this episode.
yeah, celebration of jerks. Is this guy overblown? Because what is he doing besides being mean to this lady?
Well,
Right?
the only demonstrably thing that he does to help her is overcome stage fright. I would say her actual singing talent never seems to change. She doesn't, if she was supposed to be like overweight or something or unhealthy at the beginning and she got healthier, that's never, you never can get
Oh,
that from this movie.
yeah, she's certainly no Christian Bale. She didn't go to any great
No.
lengths to do that kind of stuff. But I don't think they would have wanted the sound to be bad, because this movie is about seeing Grace Moore sing. That's it. They don't want the sound to be bad.
So that first scene where he sees her in the bar and he's telling her, which I thought was a great scene, where he's like, hit the high C, and she does it, and he's like, do it again, and she just keeps doing it, and I'm like, wow, like that. Even I recognize that's talent right there, you
No,
know?
this movie is the music equivalent of pornography, where the the plot is a thinly veiled device to get us to the music, right? And there's no moral to this story. It's kind of muddled what actually happens, because she doesn't have the confidence to go on and she gets forced out on stage, and I'm like, is she going to find confidence in herself?
Yeah.
Because I'm in the year 2023, and of course she's not. Of course she has to look down and see that guy. Not her mom, not her dad, not her friend. The lady that's helping her out, she doesn't care about. Everyone that was in Italy, she left behind. It has to be that guy. There's no reason that final scene would have been that long if the movie was about anything besides music.
You are making me appreciate this movie a little more than I did, I think. I probably ranked it lower than I should have, because thinking about it that way.
Ranked it very low, but I'm not saying I didn't enjoy it. If you like singing, it's a movie for you. I will recommend it on that caveat. I am nostalgic for this era in the sense that my grandmother was born in 1918, and this era of movies was like the era. So anytime they're singing a song in a movie, my grandmother probably sang it to me.
Knew it, yeah. That's really interesting.
When you're saying, look at it from a 1934 perspective, that's my 1934 perspective. People were like, this lady's really good at singing.
Yeah.
I'll see that lady sing, you know?
Right, I'm glad that you brought that. We're going to hit the next movie.
Yeah, so The Barretts of Wimpole Street. My review of this is that it is the world's first Lifetime movie. That's my review of this.
All right. Slow your roll. Let me do the people at home expect a certain routine on these things. The Barretts of Wimpole Street, September 14th, 1934, directed by Sidney Franklin. Saw this on Amazon. The only reason I keep pointing out where these are found is because I hate watching videos where they talk about a movie and you can't find it. And you're like, how did you even watch this thing? Or even on Letterboxd, people are like, I watched this movie that there's only one copy that exists. Like we're going to talk about. And you're like, how did you see this? Tell me so I can do it. You can go to Amazon right now in 2023 and watch The Barretts of Wimpole Street.
I would say don't do it.
Length, 110 minutes, stars Norma Shearer as Elizabeth Barrett, Frederick March as poet Robert Browning, Charles Lofton as Edward Moulton Barrett, her father, and Una O'Connor as Wilson the maid. Una O'Connor plays a housekeeper maid in a lot of movies, an English housekeeper maid. not to be confused with an American housekeeper or maid who will typically be black, which we'll talk about soon.
I'd rather just comic relief, but any comic relief in this movie was just off-putting.
Yes. Nominated twice, once for Best Picture, once for Best Actress, Norma Shearer. Lost both. All right, let me start with this behind the scenes. The numerous love letters that Robert and Elizabeth exchanged before their marriage, and this is the real Robert and Elizabeth because this is based on the true story, give readers a great deal of information about this famous courtship in their own words. The correspondence was well underway before they ever met in person. He opens his first letter to her. I love your verses with all my heart, dear Miss Barrett. And I love you too. That was January 10th, 1845. Several editions of these letters have been published, the first being one compiled by their son in 1898. Both the play and film reflect popular concerns at the time, particularly Freudian analysis. Although Edward Barrett's behavior in disinheriting any of the children who marry seems bizarre, there seems to be no evidence of his being sexually aggressive towards any of his family members in real life. For the screenplay, all overt suggestions of incest were removed from Bessier's original play. But that old scamp Charles Laughton said, they can't censor the gleam in my eyes.
Did he really say that?
Yeah, he did. So
that's the part that I wasn't sure about in terms of this movie, because I read that he made a sexual pass at the daughter in the movie, and I was like, I didn't see that. It was very subtle.
It's the romance of the two poets. Norma Shearer's character, Elizabeth Barrett, has some kind of illness. Do we know the illness?
I looked it up. Polio was one of the things that I read, and also chronic fatigue syndrome. Like, to me, it just screamed Munchausen syndrome, like the father was keeping her sick, right?
I think I said that out loud watching the movie to myself. Okay, yeah, so there's a romance between these two, and this other poet, Robert Browning, is sending her letters. And this is another one of those movies like House of Rothschild, where the movie starts, a new sibling keeps entering the room, and you're like, okay, there's 6 boys and 3 girls. Don't bother paying attention. I think there's one blonde boy who might have a few lines here and there.
And there's a cousin as well. Strangely comedic.
She's doing a weird accent, like a baby doll, like a, oh, mister.
Yeah, because she says bridesmaids. I want you to be one of my bridesmaids. Her humor in the context of this movie just makes it creepier. The whole thing just had this air of creepiness. Even though they don't overtly say that it's incest, the father is so creepy and it's so oppressive throughout the movie that you can't enjoy anything else about the movie.
He is like a Hollywood villain through and through. There is no good in this person. Even right to the end of the movie, when you think maybe there's going to be this cathartic moment of him realizing I've lost my daughter and I've ruined everything. Instead, he turns back to the family and it's like, where's the dog? We're killing it. You know?
Yeah, that's what I said. I was like, that. I made a note about that where he was just like, I will have her dog. It must be destroyed at once. And they're like, sorry, she took her dog with her.
But yeah, that scene with him and that baby talking cousin was so creepy, where she's on his lap and like touching his beard and he's like kind of smiling a little. Whew, that was very uncomfortable.
The whole plot of the movie, this is why I called it a Lifetime movie, because it's just about these young ladies who live in this house with this father who's overbearing, and he calls whatever is going on with him and why he's trying to stop his girls from coming of age a brutal tyranny of the senses, right? And then he says his sisters were not born of love, but of fear, which I take to mean that he raped their mother.
The mother.
Elizabeth Browning was like, I hate to think of what mother would go through. But the problem with this movie is that they're so sympathetic to the father out loud all the time. He's such an uncomfortable character to deal with. So I wrote down, there are plot movies, there are dialogue movies, there are visual movies. This is a plot movie all the way.
Yeah.
What's driving this is the plot. The dialogue is fine. There's some interesting moments. There's this moment where Elizabeth Barrett Browning asks the poet Robert Browning what a particular line in a poem means.
Oh, yeah.
They really allude a lot in this to poetry being completely meaningless, because at a certain point they're talking to the maid, and she says something like, "What would that poem mean to you?" And she's like, "Oh, everyone knows all the best poems don't make sense." Right? So Robert Browning says, when that passage was written, only God and Robert Browning understood it. And now only God understands. That was a small glint of something humorous in what was generally just an onslaught of the father's oppressive activity. There wasn't really a lot going on. There was two main sisters, Elizabeth and her sister, whose name was Henrietta.
Yep.
Henrietta trying to get with a captain who was, I think it was a sea captain. These are the kinds of suggestive things they say in this movie. The father says to the daughter, "Since when has it been your custom to buckle on his accoutrement?"
Oh, yeah.
That was very suggestive in that moment. I thought the interesting scene was the scene where she meets him at the post office, and she keeps talking to him, and every time he tries to answer, she says, "Don't answer."
Yeah.
That was humorous. But in the context of this movie, you can't ever enjoy yourself because it's like watching, like, the father character is so oppressive. You're just constantly like, I'm watching something terrible going on.
And I didn't think Frederick March, who I really liked in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I don't think he did a great job here. His fast, rapid fire delivery, and some of those lines are so creepy because he almost comes across as like a stalker. Like, I fell in love with you from a letter, and I've been like, and it's this fast talking, telling her I love her really quickly and many, many times, where you're just kind of like, this doesn't feel like the safety net that's going to help her out of this situation. He just feels like another weirdo. But I do feel like the ending of this movie improved how I felt about it a little bit. Her choice to abandon the money of her dad and escape in the night. Like, I perked up and was more interested in the movie, but then the movie's over. I think finding out it was based on a true story too helped, because I'm like, what kind of movie is this?
Right. It's a plot movie.
You're right. The treatment of poetry in this really just came across to me as like pastime of the rich. Him being like it was meaningless. So you can come up to this girl's room that you've never met and tell her you love her a million times, and you're a poet, and you're saying that your poetry is meaningless. Why is anything you're saying have any emotional content? Did they ever read any of her poetry in the movie?
No, but she wrote that famous poem, "How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Ways." So I think that's another thing that probably was fresh in popular culture. If you think about what people were doing in school at that time, people were memorizing poems. There was just like a time in history where people would just rattle off poems about different things. That was used to be a very erudite thing to do, right?
As an American, it's just some of these English movies, they're hard to relate to in the first place, but B, the 30s ones particularly so, because we're way at a different time. You know, my questions are always like, this is how they lived? You know, I never see anyone working. Like, no one in that family ever was like, well, got to get to my job. You know, there's like six boys.
No. Yeah, it's a class. But this was the particular movie that I read that quote, "Sticks, Nicks, Hick Pick." See if I can find that article for you. It's a famous headline posted in Variety covering newspaper Hollywood entertainment industry on July 17th, 1935, over an article about the reaction of rural audiences to movies in rural life. Form of headlinees that the newspaper called slangwage means that people in rural areas reject motion pictures about rural people. The accompanying article is based on an interview with Joe Kinski, who operated theaters in mostly rural tri-state circuit of Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska. Kinski claims that farmers are not interested in farming pictures, and that two recent pictures set in an upper middle class milieu, The Barretts of Wimple Street and The Scarlet Pimpernel, had been big successes with his demographic.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. But I mean, at the last Academy Awards or two ago, a movie called State Fair about rural life at a fair was nominated for Best Movie. So, I mean, how up to date are these? They liked it that year, and like next year they're like, we're done with movies about us. We've seen it. Show us something fantastic.
On the depiction, because this is the same year where It Happened One Night won. So obviously they didn't love
True. Una O'Connor, the thing I wanted to point out to you that I loved about her in this movie is the way she walked across the room, like in that dress. It was like she was hovering. She must have been doing such fast little steps And I felt like it contrasted great with Norma Shearer not being able to walk. Like just this floating maid. I think however she did that was really impressive to me.
It was so visually impactful, and the dog was really like, the dog was also meant to kind of lighten the mood of the movie, but the guy that was mean was so mean. This was another one of those celebration of jerks movies.
Yes.
You just wanted to be like, go away, stop. How did you rate that movie?
That is number.
No, you're not allowed to tell me which number, right?
Well, I can tell you because it's at the end. It's in my bottom four. So it's number 9 on my list.
Wow.
Very, very low. But again, sometimes they get the low rating, and it's just, I don't think this was necessarily a bad movie. It just wasn't a good one. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone I like, unless you're really obsessed with these two poets.
What's thrilling about movies is when the plot takes twists and turns and you're not sure what's going to happen, or this person's up and then they're down. Just having people continuously abused throughout a movie, even if you're putting in like little humorous things of people floating across the screen, is still pretty punishing, and that's the reason why I would not suggest it.
And it's that repetition of like, this movie runs way long, and it's a lot of scenes of just the one poet saying how much he loves her. It's like, I get it. I believe you. You love her. Stop telling us in these long scenes and walks in the park and, how much you love her. Tell me something interesting. What do you do when you leave?
I wrote, boy, he's upbeat. That's what I wrote about him.
Yeah. Remember that scene where he's like, I need to ask my mother if you can live with us? I was like, he has a mother and he lives with her? Like, what?
You're so desperate for any other information.
Give me more intel on this guy.
You saw some guy walking by in the background. You're like, where's that guy going?
Where's he going? Moving on.
Yay!
The Gay Divorcee. I know you've already spoiled me that I know that you're favorable towards this movie.
I sure am.
I surely am. October 19th, 1934 is when this came out. Directed by Mark Sandrich. Available on Amazon. Length, 107 minutes. Starring Ginger Rogers as Mimi, Fred Astaire as Guy Holden, and Edward Everett Horton as Egbert. This was nominated 5 times. It won once. Nominated for Best Picture, Music, Sound Recording, Art Direction, Lost. Won for Music, The Continental, the song. Gay Divorcee is a 1934 American musical film based on the Broadway musical Gay Divorce. Stage version included many songs by Cole Porter, which were left out of the film except for Night and Day. Though most of the songs were replaced, the screenplay kept the original plot of the stage version. 3 members from the play's original cast reprised their roles. Astaire, Rhodes as Tonetti, and Eric Blore as he's kind of the weird waiter. The Hayes office, our enemies at the Hayes office, insisted that they change the name from Gay Divorce to the Gay Divorcee, on the grounds that while a divorcee could be gay or lighthearted, it would be unseemly to allow a divorce to appear so. According to Astaire, the change was made proactively by RKO. The director, Mark Sandrich, told them that the Gay Divorcee was selected as a new name because the studio thought it was a more attractive-sounding title centered around a girl. I did a movie with Gavin at the 3rd Academy Awards called The Divorcee, which had a similar title change because they didn't want it to sound... They didn't want to celebrate divorce.
They made them add "the" at the beginning just to be like, this person individually is a gay divorcee. That doesn't mean that you're going to be happy if you get divorced. Okay.
This was the second of 10 pairings of Astaire and Rogers in film. James Wingate, director of the Studio Relations Office, warned, considering the delicate nature of the subject upon which this script is based, great care should be taken in the scenes dealing with Mimi's lingerie, and no intimate articles should be used. Wingate also insisted that no actor or actress appear in only pajamas. So we're seeing actual Hays Code interference now.
Pajamas.
Yeah. So they were really obsessed with what she wears in the scene where they're staging to make it look like an affair is taking place. All right, let me read the synopsis, and then we're going to go to your thoughts on this. Mimi Glossop seeks a divorce from her geologist husband, Cyril Glossop. whom she has not seen for some time. Under the guidance of her domineering and much married Aunt Hortense, she consults incompetent and bumbling lawyer Egbert Fitzgerald, once a fiancé of her aunt. He arranges for her to spend a night at a seaside hotel and be caught in an adulterous relationship, for which purpose he hires a professional correspondent, Rodolfo Tonetti. But Egbert forgets to arrange for private detectives to come and catch the couple. By coincidence, Guy Holden, an American dancer and friend of Egbert's, who briefly met Mimi on his arrival in England and who is now besotted with her, also arrives at the hotel, only to be besotted. This is a Wikipedia one. Besotted with her. That means he's obsessed with her, right? He's like kind of, he's got the hots for her.
I don't know about that use of the word besotted.
Besotted with her. Well, that's what it says here, and that this Wikipedia is never wrong. Anyone can edit it. Hold on, where was I? Arrives. Besotted, yes. So Guy Holden, Fred Astaire shows up to the hotel, and Mimi mistakes him for the correspondent that she's supposed to be looking for. While they're in Mimi's bedroom, the actual guy, Tonetti, shows up, reveals the truth, and holds the two of them prisoner just so the plan can go down the way it's supposed to go down. Astaire and Rogers contrive to escape and dance the night away. In the morning, after several mistakes with the waiter, Cyril arrives at the door, so Guy hides in the next room while Mimi and Tonetti give a show of being lovers. When Cyril, her husband, does not believe them, Guy comes out and embraces Mimi in an attempt to convince him that he is the lover. But it doesn't work. It is an unwitting waiter who finally clears the whole thing up by revealing that Cyril himself is a real adulterer, thus clearing the way for Mimi to get a divorce and marry Guy. And the last note I have is the Continental, the song that won the first Academy Award for Best Original Song. The Continental was a 17-minute song and dance sequence towards the end of the film, sung by Rogers, Eric Rhodes, and Lillian Miles, and danced by Rogers, Astaire, and ensemble performers. Sarah, what'd you think about this movie?
See, that's interesting because in the movie, the song is 17 minutes long, and it just goes on forever. So
yeah,
that would be really, whether or not you like that song will really help you decide whether or not you like this movie. This movie is lighthearted. So considering that I sat through a lot of other movies that I felt were kind of punishing, it's just a silly movie, and it has some of the best dancing, and it's just fun. In terms of plot, it falls neither in the top or the bottom. Number one, it says a lot about divorce in 1934, because this woman wants to be divorced, but instead of being able to just ask for a divorce, she has to...
You know, it's actually weird. She has to make herself look bad to get the divorce.
Yeah, and then arrange for a correspondent.
Are they in America or are they in England?
They're visiting England, but they're American. Although the reason that's hard to tell is because all of the accents in this movie are incredibly fake. Yeah. Most of them are pretty poorly done. So at the beginning, they're in a cafe in France, and it's the most fun cafe you've ever seen, because there's a bunch of girls singing about being cheerful. A frown is a smile upside down, and learn to grin and take it on the chin, which is gotta be that's like a Depression era slogan if I ever heard one. And then they're dancing with their fingers. They've got little dolls on their fingers and they're dancing. Fred Astaire's character, Guy Holden, he's with a lawyer whose name is Egbert, and they both can't afford to pay for their food because they left their wallet in their other suit, and he has to tap dance because he's a professional dancer in the movie. That's how imaginative this movie is. They're just like, he just knows how to dance. In terms of what you were talking about, in terms of these people don't have jobs, they're just traveling around. They're traveling from country to country. So yeah, it's not really the most intellectual of movies, but if you like to be entertained and you find singing and dancing entertaining, it's fun. It's fun in a very of the time way.
Fred Astaire does something different with musicals in this movie, in direct opposition to probably his big competition is Busby Berkeley directing these crazy ensemble dances with all these dancers doing geometric shapes and like putting the camera in crazy spots. This movie kind of pioneers the whole incorporating the song kind of into the plot while showing the actors in full. So you can see long takes of the actual dance, which is very impressive. And Fred Astaire is amazing. Like whether you like musicals or into dancing, you can't deny that this guy has a lot of talent. There was a couple takes in there where I'm like, this has been going on without a cut for a really long time. To me, that's really impressive. And when a movie can do that, when we did the Busby Berkeley musicals with Jeff, our last episode, he did not respond to it. Hated it. Was like, could not stand the movies. Like, I hate how they keep breaking into song. And I think if that's not your thing, then you're not going to like this movie.
I think maybe what attracted me to this movie the most was Fred Astaire as a male character, because he was the least macho of the men. He really had a character that was like lighthearted and fun.
Fred Astaire, I'd read somewhere when he first got into movies, they didn't want to hire him. Like, I think there was some quote, I don't remember it exactly, but it was something like, can't act, slightly bald, can dance a little.
Yeah, he's definitely not traditionally handsome.
Yeah.
However, this lady was not interested in him at all at the beginning of the movie. And he chased her to the point where she crashed her car.
The stalking element of these older movies, and to me, if you go right up to modern times where guys in their cars are catcalling women out and following them down streets, these movies made all that feel like, well, that's just normal life. That Of Human Bondage movie I watched with Bette Davis, when the guy is hitting on her, she's a waitress, he literally tells her, you should smile more. Like, he gives her the whole, in 1934, you could benefit by smiling a little bit while she's at her job doing her work and she has to interact with this guy. And I just think the behavior of these desperate men pursuing women, peeking in their windows, following them, figuring out what their name is.
Also makes her write his phone number down several times.
Yeah.
So the only time that you even think that she has any interest in him is when she actually calls him, right?
Which, it's just like, why are these movies spending so much time with this like whole hard to get thing? At least give her like, and oh, by the way, that whole scene at the beginning of her dress being stuck in the thing and him helping her by ripping it was also disgusting. It's like, she said, go get help. Go do the thing she instructed you to do.
Yeah, he just ripped her dress off.
And then you'll be a hero. Yeah.
It's supposed to be physical comedy, but just in the context of 1934, it was probably more like, yeah, why didn't that babe just get over it? like, I'm sure they weren't like, oh, that was wrong. I mean, really, things have changed since 1934. Yeah. Relationships between men and women have changed since 1934. You can't look at it from a modern perspective. And back then, men had a little bit more of a leeway to be creepy without it being problematic.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure they weren't. This is what workplace training videos were created for, to stop behaviors that were happening.
But Sarah, like you said earlier, there are movies from this time period that show genuine people getting together that don't feel like this stalkery thing. So I don't think everyone in the 1930s was a creep, but it seems like a lot of them making movies were.
Yeah. I mean, the plot of this movie is not the reason it's interesting. There are some interesting plot things that happen, but that's not why the movie is interesting. The reason the movie is interesting, like, here's something I wrote in my notes. At this point, I'm wondering if this lady is going to be into dancing. If so, she's in luck, because he's a professional dancer, but she's not a professional dancer. And yet when they go out dancing together, she keeps up with him, no problem. So obviously, the reason that people like these movies is not for their ability to reflect real life, or to uphold moral values. Especially this is the second movie. There's two movies that we're watching where there's like a love affair going on between a married person and an unmarried person, and it's like okay for that to happen. Because the first one is It Happened One Night, and that one that's the winner, right? My question about this movie is, at what point do we actually find out that she likes him? Because that's what's really... He meets this lady, he likes her a lot. Where's the movie going from there? He's chasing her, she doesn't want anything to do with him. Then we find out Egbert is actually her lawyer, because his father's a lawyer. That's good coincidence, and that's what comes up with all these kind of like what they do for comedies a lot of times is mistaken identities, and that was the big quote in this movie was, Do you remember it? I wrote it down.
The secret code.
Yeah.
I don't know if I wrote it down. You write it down?
We're gonna sound like the character. I wrote it down somewhere. Yeah, no, it was like fate is
Fate is a thing at night.
chance is a fool's name for fate.
Chance is a fool's name for fate.
Yeah.
I mean, not the most memorable one. It gets said a lot in the movie. Probably my favorite dance in this was the Cole Porter Night and Day
Yeah.
dance. Like that, I felt like you could do that today exactly the same. That song still holds up all these years later. It's almost a shame they couldn't use, for whatever reason, all of the Cole Porter songs, because I feel like that would have just been fantastic. Because, like, yeah, the Continental doesn't really stick in my head even after watching 17 minutes of it. Whereas Night and Day was just so good. And I think that was their first dance together too.
That's so funny because I was singing the Continental this morning.
Were you really? Sarah, how's it go?
I don't know the exact words. It's like it's very charming. The Continental. The Continental. Yeah.
All right.
I mean, for like 17 minutes of the movie, they were dancing. They were dancing. They were dancing. Coordinated outfits.
They took breaks dancing too. They go sit at a table and other people are dancing. And they're like, all right, let's go dance again. Song's still going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're high on this movie. Is this your top 4?
It's in my top 4. There was that cool scene where he cuts out this amazing silhouette and he tapes it to a record player.
Oh yeah, that was very Home Alone.
Right? But it's not. Home Alone is very gay divorcee. I thought, given the name of it, I thought, oh, I'm not going to like this movie, but I liked it. Here's a picture of the sparkly ravioli hat, if I can find it. Let's see where it is. There it is. She was wearing this hat. It was like a ravioli with flowers on it. It was really... And that was the woman who was her aunt, who also had some kind of brain damage because she got married to Egbert. And then she said, oh, we're going to get married. And he said, we got married last night. And she went, oh, that's right. Like,
yeah, she had no short-term memory. She was like the opposite of the Memento guy.
I was like, really? Like, should she not be in the hospital? Do you guys not like... Like, that's serious memory lapse.
All right, you ready to move on?
Yeah.
The White Parade. Sarah, let me start with this. The White Parade came out November 16th, 1934, directed by Irving Cummings. How did you watch this movie?
It's unwatchable. It's not available. You have to go to... When I first started this project, I was like, I'm going to go to UCLA and watch the White Parade. Is that the only place it's available?
Yeah, one copy at the UCLA Film Archive. So you didn't go. You didn't do... Sarah?
I get that the copy there is in actually very bad shape.
Yeah, it has like the numbers. All right, well, let me read what I have. There's so little on this movie. It was 80 minutes long. It starred Loretta Young as June Arden. Loretta Young was in House of Rothschild, so if you can remember what she looks like. Or she's on this poster we're looking at. And John Bowles as Ronald Hall III. Nominated twice for sound recording and for Best Picture. Won none of them. The White Parade is a 1934 film written by Rian James, Jesse Lasky, Sonia Levian, and Ernest Pascal from a novel by Rian James. It's dedicated to the memory of Florence Nightingale. The plot concerns the travails and romances of young women as they studied to become nurses. So those of you at home thinking The White Parade was a different kind of movie, shame on you. It's about nurses. The only surviving print is located at the UCLA archive, as Sarah pointed out. The print is in rough shape. Several frames are out of alignment at times, while the whole picture looks bleached out and very fuzzy. As well, near the end of the film, a sign pops up indicating Reel 7. Okay, I got a little synopsis, and I had to go off Wikipedia for this. So,
okay.
And yeah, I think it's interesting, the synopsis, because considering the movies we've already talked about, so there is a little discussion we can have when I'm done with this about what this movie could have been and how this relates to the other films. So I got 2 little bits here. One, written by Matt Foster from his blog, Matt versus the Academy. This is from 2013. And he went to see the movie at the UCLA archives. A group of young women converge on a teaching hospital to spend 3 years in training to be nurses. The story mainly focuses on June Arden, who, in an attempt to fit in with the popular girls, pretends to be the fiancée of wealthy Ronald Hall III. after seeing his picture in the society pages. When one of the other girls questions her, she agrees to meet with Hall to prove it. Luckily for her, the two actually fall in love for each other, and so the deception morphs into reality. But as June approaches the end of her training, she has to decide whether she wants to pursue a life of caring for sick people or a life with a family. The script is witty in only the way that 1930s films can be, bolstered by elements of screwball comedy. And speaking of elements common to the 1930s, you won't be surprised to hear sexist attitudes from the men, as when Ronald attempts to persuade June to give up nursing to be his wife, explaining that it's just as honorable to serve one as it is to serve many. Surprisingly, though, the conclusion of the film defies the stereotype, and June sacrifices married life for her career as a nurse.
And that's why they didn't save the movie. They were like, forget this movie.
Oh, she doesn't fall in love and stay with the older, weird man she met in a weird way? No, not saving this one.
I was surprised that wasn't a young Vincent Price. It looked like Vincent Price to me.
Doesn't he? Yeah, I don't know if I've seen John Bowles in another movie before. So a couple other little notes before we move on, and then we will move on. And this is from Will Remmers on Letterboxd, one of about 3 people on Letterboxd who actually did go to UCLA to watch this movie. He just had some interesting shot things in the movie that I think kind of give us a clue maybe whether this movie was good or bad. He said there's a scene of Loretta doing a practice injection on an orange that transitions to an orange being turned into juice by a soda jerk at a diner counter. And that sounds kind of interesting for 1934. There's a cigar transition where John Bowles puts cigars in his pocket in a close-up, and then in the next scene, there's dudes smoking cigars. He said there's only one scene in the movie of men talking to each other. So there's another reason this movie was clearly immediately thrown away.
That means, well, it still might not pass the Bechdel test.
Oh, yeah. Well, if the nurses are all just harping on about John Bowles the whole movie, then yeah, that could be a problem.
I think the most unbelievable thing about the movie, despite the fact that she sees a picture of a famous guy in the newspaper and says she's married to him and then gets married to him, is that she decides to choose her career.
Yeah, that's most unbelievable. The story, and the poster says, the story was never told. Of girls, nobody knows. What does that mean? There's an interesting note that John Bowles has a scene of him singing Silent Night, which I think is kind of cool because that's as an old Christmas song, 1934. That might have been interesting to see. There's a picture I'd found online of the two of these actors in front of a tinseled out Christmas tree. So I'm assuming that's where he sings Silent Night. Let's see. And the one last thing he has in here is, quote, "If it had been real love, it would have won against us." Dr. Thorne to Loretta explaining to her why she didn't want to quit nursing. So him mansplaining why she dumped him at the end of the movie. I did, Sarah, when we did episode 2 with me and Rob, we had a lost movie there, The Patriot. And fans of this show know they were really upset when I picked it for the Golden Boy for Best Picture because the other movies were so terrible that I did the logic that The Patriot had to rest between what I would recommend and what I would not recommend. It's that unknown line between them. That's where I reasoned it. And I was like, I wouldn't recommend a single one of these movies, so therefore the movie that's the line wins. So White Parade, for me, is like, no, it's in the middle of these movies. Like, I would rank it. It's not going to win Best Picture this time.
It's a line where you start to decide whether or not you like a movie. I get it. I get it. So you have a line where you recommend movies and you don't, and in the middle is the White Parade. I can't recommend it, but all right, we'll see where I put it in. I didn't realize I was rating that one as well. I would rate it above a lot of things considerably.
I have it at number 5.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
Although I don't know, because in talking with you, some movies like Gay Divorcee I feel a little bit different about, and One Night of Love for sure I had real low, and now I'm looking at it a little differently. Imitation of Life came out November 26, 1934, directed by John M. Stahl. I purchased the Criterion Blu-ray, which is behind me somewhere. How were you able to watch this?
I rented it either Amazon or Apple.
111 minutes. This is a longer movie. Starring Claudette Colbert as Beatrice Bia Pullman, Louise Beavers as Delilah Johnson, Freddie Washington as Peola Johnson, William Warren as Stephen Archer, the ichthyologist, and Ned Sparks as Elmer Smith, Bea and Delilah's business partner. Imitation of Life is a 1934 American drama film based on Fannie Hurst's 1933 novel of the same name. Inspiration in writing her novel was a road trip to Canada she took with her friend, African-American short story writer and folklorist Zora Neale Hurston. Molly Hero of the University of Portland wrote that the script of this film closely followed the storyline of the original novel. Here comes the Hays Code. Universal had difficulty receiving approval from the censors at the Hays office for the original script they submitted. Joseph Breen objected to the elements of miscegenation in the story, which not only violates the production code, but is very dangerous from the standpoint both of industry and public policy. He rejected the project, writing, Hearst's novel, dealing with a partly colored girl who wants to pass as white, violates the clause covering miscegenation in spirit, if not in fact. The Production Code Administration censors had difficulty in negotiating how boundaries of racial difference should be cinematically constructed to be seen and believed on the screen. Their concern was the character of Peola, a young woman considered black but with sufficient white ancestry to pass as white and the desire to do so. Susan Courtney, in her article, Picturing Race, Hollywood's Censorship of Miscegenation and Production of Racial Visibility Through Imitation of Life, says that the PCA participated in Hollywood's ongoing desire to remake interracial desire, as always, having been a taboo. She goes on, the PCA reads Peola's light skin and her passing as signifiers of miscegenation. By conflating miscegenation and passing in this way, the censors effectively attempt to extend the code's ban on desire across black and white racial boundaries to include a ban on identification across those boundaries as well. They also objected to language in the script, the Hays Code, Joseph Breen, and a scene which I don't think was in the movie, I don't remember it, a scene where a young black man is nearly lynched for approaching a white woman who he believed had invited his attention. Breen continued to refuse to approve the script up until July 17th, when the director had already begun shooting the film for 2 weeks. Ultimately, the ending of the film differed from the novel. In the novel, Peola leaves the area never to return. In the film, she returns, going to her mother's funeral and showing remorse. All right, I got to read the synopsis on this movie because I think we're going to talk a little bit about it. Bea Pullman, a white widow and single mother of 2-year-old Jessie, struggles to make ends meet running her late husband's door-to-door maple syrup business. That is until Delilah Johnson, the black housekeeper and single mother to 4-year-old Peola, mistakenly knocks on her door looking for work. An agreement is worked out when Delilah sees that Bea could use the help, and soon Delilah and Peola are living with Bea and Jessie in exchange for housekeeping and cooking. The four quickly become a family. But Delilah happens to make particularly fantastic pancakes, made from a secret family recipe. And Bea gets the idea to open a storefront on the Jersey Shore selling pancakes and syrup. The children, now older, attend school, and one day Peola returns home crying after Jessie calls her black. Peola is light-skinned due to her father, whom we are told was also light-skinned and struggled with it until it broke him. Peola does not want to be black and resents her mother for making her black. Delilah receives another blow when she finds out that Peola has been passing at her school. One day, Elmer Smith, a hungry, broke passerby, offers Bea a 2-word idea in exchange for a meal. Box it. The flour. Bea hires him, and they set up Delilah's pancake flour business, which is wildly successful. When Bea tells Delilah that she can now afford her own home, Delilah is crushed. She does not want to break up the family. So the two friends continue to live together, and Bea puts Delilah's share in the bank. 10 years pass. Both women are wealthy and share a mansion in New York City. Delilah becomes a mainstay in the African-American community, supporting many lodges and charitable organizations and her church. She tries to give Peola every advantage, including sending her to a fine Negro college in the South. But Peola runs away. Meanwhile, Bea engages in a silly romantic subplot with a fish scientist that is so charming, Bea's daughter Jessie also falls in love with him. Delilah and Bea find that Peola has taken a job in the segregated restaurant, serving white customers only, in Virginia. When Delilah enters the store, Peola denies knowing her at first, before running away. Peola finally tells her mother that she is going away, never to return, so she can pass as a white woman, and if they meet on the street, her mother must not speak to her. Delilah is heartbroken and takes to her bed, murmuring Peola's name and forgiving Peola before eventually succumbing to heartbreak. Delilah gets the grand funeral she always wanted, with marching bands and a horse-drawn white silk hearse, and we finally see the huge impact Delilah had on the community outside of the household when the church and street, getting emotional reading this, sorry, when the church and street are filled with people from all the lodges and charitable organizations she was a part of. Her coffin is carried from the church to the hearse through the saber arch of an honor guard, and a remorseful, sobbing Peola rushes to embrace it, begging her dead mother to forgive her. Bea and Jesse gather her in their arms and take her into the car with them. Sometime later, Peola decides to return to college as her mother would have wanted. Bea ends her romantic subplot by putting it on hold and ends the film by telling her daughter how she met Delilah in the opening scene of the movie. The end.
You know?
I cut the subplot part because I figured we could either talk about it or not, and because this movie is clearly. I've seen people call it the B plot, the Peola storyline, but I definitely read it watching it as that is the main plot.
Right. Well, look at this poster. You would have it. Yeah. They would have you believe it's about Claudette Colbert and
or Warren William.
I guess in that sense, the movie's about the sacrifice of a mother, but really the main part of the movie that's interesting is the relationship between Peola and her mother.
Yeah, this poster, I think, is probably a product of the Hays Code not wanting to put black actors on their posters. They have no problem, like in Cleopatra, putting artistic depictions of black characters on their posters. But yeah, they're not going to put Louise Beavers on the poster.
Well, at this point, you're going to show that sign they make of her face, right? You'll edit that in right here.
Kenny in the editing booth. On the screen right now is Aunt Delilah's pancake flour advertisement right next to Aunt Jemima pancake advertisement. Let's just say they're very similar.
I got to a point in the movie where I was like, this is going to be a story about Aunt Jemima, right? Yes. It's not, you can't, this is another movie that you have to look at through the lens of 1934 and not now, because the first thing that comes up is the relationship between using black people on food as, Uncle Ben and stuff like that. And then you're like, no. But it's interesting to hear about the Hays Code stuff because I really started watching this movie being like, is this a movie about race? And then they really toe a very specific line with race that it sounds like was enforced by the Hays Code. They weren't trying to push any boundaries in terms of like Peola. Her whole entire thing was like she didn't want to be seen as black. But the moral of the story was she rejected her blackness and then she regretted it, right? The bad part of the story was that her mother character was just like a caricature. There were black people writing about it at the time being like, no, this is not okay. This is actually not forward thinking. But like every other movie, it's really challenging to figure out what the imitation of life is in this movie. What do you think the title refers to?
Louise Beavers. I printed this up off. If I can show it to you right here. This is 150 movies that Louise Beavers starred in. The pink ones are all movies where she played a maid. The orange ones are when she plays a slave or a prisoner. And the blue ones are where she plays a character whose name is Mammy.
Ugh.
So she plays a character whose name is Mammy 8 times in her career. She plays a maid 42 times in her career. She plays Slave of the Wedding in Uncle Tom's Cabin. She plays Julia the Maid in Coquette. Sadie the Maid in Gold Diggers of Broadway. Maid, Barnum Was Right. Maid, Second Choice. Maid, True to the Navy. Nellie, Hester's Maid in Back Pay. Recaptured Love, Maid. Amelia, the Mannequin's Maid. Judy the Maid. Angela the Maid. The Black Convict, Maid, uncredited. Maid, uncredited. Maid, uncredited. Maid, Maid, uncredited. Maid, uncredited. Maddie. I feel like I'm reading the names at Pearl Harbor or something. So distressing. And a lot of these other parts that aren't highlighted, I don't know if she's a maid or not, and she probably is because they just say Julia or Hattie. It could be Hattie the maid or Julia the maid. Like, I haven't seen these movies.
Did you ever see the Key and Peele skit where they are doing this thing where they're honoring this guy who was in old movies at his funeral? and then they start to show the movies that he was in, and it just makes everyone really mad. I feel like they have an excellent skit about that.
Even her weight, like she couldn't lose weight because if she lost weight and got healthier looking, she wouldn't get the parts because they wanted a jolly, rotund black woman to play the same. And if you see her, and I've seen her in other movies, she's playing the same character. Where I think this movie is actually very subversive is that if you view her character from a film point of view as this traditional black maid that white audiences are used to, you're introduced to this Aunt Jemima to get the white audiences like, yeah, watching this movie. But I think it subverts it by then inserting Piola. And this is not for black audiences. This is like subversive to white audiences. You're introducing this mixed character and then you're asking white audiences to consider her, which I don't think they were considering. I don't think white audiences were thinking at all about it. Maybe it did more harm than good. Maybe it made white audiences be like, well, we need to look out for these, passing, black people. But I think it was trying to change the narrative a little bit.
It didn't go too deep. It didn't go too deep. They really avoided, whether it was Hays Code or just the nature of the movie, they didn't approach anything involving racism. Like when she was in the school scene,
yeah,
and mom comes to the door and she's like, "Where's your daughter?" I don't know. Her mom is really going over the top, being like, her right there, right? But then the kid in that classroom was just like, I didn't know she was black, like very innocently. Not it didn't indicate that he was being racist in any way. They didn't indicate that. So it wasn't a commentary on racism as much as a commentary on the person who was passing. Whether or not it was for black audiences, I don't know. I mean, I do like that notion, but at the same time, the mother was just played in this ridiculous way. Because the mother was played in this way where she was like, golly gee, I'm rich. I hope that doesn't mean I have to stop cleaning your house. Come on, really?
And I think when people think of black people as being subservient, they're probably picturing Louise Beavers and they're like, well, black people used to happily clean house. No, you're thinking of one actor in 42 movies
that was
who was based on nothing.
In your brain, right? It was reified in your brain that was the case because
there was no real person like this. And one of the things I had read is that scene where she goes to the school that you mentioned, they were like, no black parent would ever go to a school and out their kid like that. Like they would be smarter. They know how difficult it is. Like she knows this is an issue. She would not go to a school and point to her daughter in a white room and be like, that girl's black. Like that is no character would do that. And it plays into the dumb. She's dumb too, right? She's not as smart.
There could be more nuance where she would, I think it could have still been an interesting movie if she was like, I'm here to pick up, my whatever charge. Like there's something sad about her not being able to own her daughter and her daughter rejecting that. It could have been more nuanced.
Well, I think Sarah, the place I disagree, or I would disagree, is the funeral, because what you get, you're right. Up until I think the funeral, this movie is it's not doing anything really interesting. But what it does at the funeral is it shows you, without even talking about it, an actual, like, this is a black funeral. And you see, like, I'm sure none of these white audiences have seen men in uniform like that, all these different lodges. Like, that felt really subversive in this movie. Like, that would not have been allowed in another movie to have a scene like that. And I felt like they build to that moment where you now get an actual small slice of maybe actual black life towards the end.
I give you credit there. I give you credit for that. But up until that point, I was like, why is this lady so humble, but she's being really extravagant at her funeral? That kind of, I was like, throughout her entire life, she was like, I don't need anything special. Just when I die, I want to be draped in velvet and diamonds and march to God on a golden chariot. I'm just like, why is she's not even going to be alive. Why is she so into her funeral? That was a part. I mean, I know I'm being a little bit difficult there a little bit,
That was also Chekhov's funeral, right? Because she says early in the film, like, I just want a big funeral. And you're like, well, I guess she's dying by the end of this movie.
yeah, right. Like, but her mom was again clueless when she was in the cafe. Yeah. She was like, knock, 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 knock. Hey, yo, it's your mom.
Yeah. I think if she were a real character, she'd have been like, hey, B, go get my daughter out of the store.
Like, come on, I mean, I think it'd be interesting to see the version that was approved before the Hays Code and then what the Hays Code did to it. I immediately wanted to read about the person who was passing because I was like, oh, if that person was white, that would be interesting. If they're black, it would also be interesting for them. So It turns out the person who played Paola, her name is Freddie Washington. Her experiences in the film industry and theater forced her to become a civil rights activist. She slowly became more of an activist than a performer and worked in the radio. And she had this beautiful quote where she said, this I feel like is an important quote that she said in 1945. She said, you see, I'm a mighty proud gal, and I can't for the life of me, find any valid reason why anyone should lie about their origin or anything else for that matter. Frankly, I do not ascribe to the stupid theory of white supremacy and to try to hide the fact that I am a Negro for the economic or any other reasons. If I do, I would be agreeing to be a Negro makes me inferior, and that I have swallowed whole hog all of the propaganda dished out by our fascist-minded white citizens. So she said that in 1945. Obviously, the times weren't quite as behind as we would like to assume. It probably had a lot to do with the Hays Code and popular culture.
She lost roles after this. She was only in 2 more movies, according to Wikipedia, after this. And I read that it was partly because they saw her as a black actress now. I commend the movie actually because I expected, okay, yeah, they definitely, young Piolas are white. Both of the younger versions of Piola were mixed race. All the excuses Hollywood loves to give is like, well, we got like the actors around us. These are all white actors and the ones that are available to us. Like they weren't going out looking, which is why they'd put people in yellowface or blackface. And this movie actually went out and found people that actually fit the roles that as written in the movie. It's another thing. Yeah, this movie, Imitation of Life, in 2023 coming out would be hot racist garbage. Like, what is wrong with the makers of this movie? But I think put in the context of this time where there was no movies made in Hollywood or by white filmmakers with black characters like this, like almost none. It feels like this director took a chance. Well, Sarah, to answer your question from earlier on Imitation of Life, like, so the thing I love about these books turned into movies, like, and Of Human Bondage was another one that when I'm watching the movie, I'm like, is someone going to say Of Human Bondage so I can understand why this is called this?
Yeah.
But Imitation of Life never has a scene like that says like, well, this is an imitation of life. But I think it has to do with 2 things. And one we've talked about and one we haven't. And the one I think is Paola's imitation of a white person, like her imitating, like trying to fit in and pretend she's something she's not, that society won't consider her. So she has to try to pretend and have an imitation of a normal life, even though she knows she's black and she's trying to hide it. The second, we talked about that. The second one, I think, which is very interesting in this movie until halfway through, is Claudette Colbert as B, imitation of a male. She is an entrepreneur, a businesswoman. Up until halfway through, there's no sense of a relationship. She's dealing with her daughter. She's doing it on her own. She's fine with that. She's strong arms. There's this great scene of her getting the business and telling like the landlord she'll pay him later and dealing with the painter and the furnisher. And I feel like she's stepping outside of her normal gender roles at this time period and just, using her abilities similar to Cleopatra, her like general woman sensuality to sweet talk these men into giving her these things. And then it's a wild success. And I feel like that part of the story is very interesting to me as well. It's just they do her dirty by suddenly halfway through being like, hey, here's a ichthyologist. And
In Gay Divorcee, it was geologist, and this one it's an ichthyologist. Like this new role of the scientist as lover. That I feel like is the B plot, is her relationship with this guy. It's another case of, is romance gonna mess up my business acumen?
Yeah.
She chooses the business in the end, but she really just says she's going to not be in this relationship with this guy for her bratty daughter, who's so, I mean, I think they make her daughter look pretty vapid in this, and I don't think they make her reflect, they don't, this woman sacrifices everything for her daughter. In the end, she's like, I could be really happy with you, but I think I like business, and my daughter's always going to resent me. Like, I don't know if that's realistic. If you're really happy in a relationship with someone, are you going to be like, look, my daughter who's 20 years old, even though you're 37, and that guy did not look 37, by the way. He looked about 55.
And we're meant to believe she falls in love with him. He is sitting way too close to her. There's so many scenes of like, why... I thought this movie was going to make the total fatal flaw of making him fall in love with her. At which point this movie this would be one of my lowest rated movies.
Yeah. Or just make him have an affair with her while the mom was out of town, and he's just a sleazeball. I thought it could go there too, but it didn't. That's great, right?
That's good. But still, did we need that plot?
She's like, you watch my daughter while I'm away. And I'm like, wait a minute, this older man's gonna hang out with this college-age girl, and then they were staying out till 1 a.m. That's still not okay.
Yeah, there's still, and the whole, it's so dumb the minute she said it, when she's like, let's not tell my daughter we're in a relationship. Like, why? This is the dumbest lie that causes so much problems later. And how dumb is the daughter to not be like, oh yeah, the random dude hanging around my mom probably likes her. Like, how sheltered are you?
Engages her, but at the same time, why would the daughter not be led to believe that he was into her when they're describing driving down the road at 1 a.m. in a convertible or whatever it is they're doing? That guy's not.
Yeah, the scene where he invites her back to his private aquarium was like kind of gross. Like, do you want? And
I love aquariums and I love pancakes, so I thought, oh, I'm gonna love this movie the most because it's like a pancake. A strictly pancake cafe by the sea. That sounds amazing. And then I was just like, no, I can't wholeheartedly love this movie. I liked it. It had plot. It had meaning. But it wasn't my number one because I was just like, there's some uneven things about it. That's all.
The one other thing I got to say on this movie before we move on is it contains probably one of my favorite actors from this time period who I have loved every movie I've seen him in, and I get teary-eyed with how awesome his deliveries are. And that is Ned Sparks playing like kind of the drifter who becomes her partner in the business. He has that dry, weird delivery. Like, hey, what are you? Box it up. Like,
I called him the pancake freeloader. I really didn't understand what his relationship to her was, because she was just like, hey, that guy told me to sell the thing that was really good. He needs to be in on this.
You're working with me now.
Yeah, I like that. I like that she's bringing everyone along with her, but,
And I like that they didn't set him up in any... At that point, I'm like, oh, no relationship, please. And I'm like, oh, yeah, good. He's just going to be this pal. And he really meant the best with her. Like, they're setting things up. Although, when they said that Delilah's getting 20%, I'm like, wait a minute. Who's getting the 80% on this deal? Are they splitting it? It's like, I hope that he's not getting 40%.
Yeah, that was like, and she was like, no, really, I couldn't take that much money. And you're just like, she's like, I just want to live in your house and clean up after you. And you're like, come on.
I would have been fascinated to see the father in this movie. They touch so little on him. So
he should have just been some famous white guy. That would have been the most interesting way for that to go down, right?
Yeah. It was Jimmy Cagney, the actor.
That's believable. She's like, I didn't know he was not black, because when I met him, he had shoe polish all over his face. No.
I couldn't tell.
And then there was another dog that was itchy in the background in a lot of scenes. And I was like, why is the dog there? It looks like it has fleas. And at one point they say they call the dog a flea bag. So that dog potentially really had fleas.
It's a little more realism in this movie than you expected, right, Sarah? All right, we talked about this one for a long time.
We liked it.
We liked it. This was in my top 4.
Spelling attention.
Attention! Flirtation walk. For people listening, we've got some toy soldier looking guys marching in front of flirtation walk, which are kind of at an angle there. It says atten, A-T-T-E-N with a hyphen, shun, exclamation point. And we got our 2 leads attempting a kiss, both wearing lipstick. Here we go. Flirtation Walk, December 1st, 1934, directed by Frank Borzage. I saw this on a DVD that I was forced to purchase for, I believe it was $8.99, and you then borrowed that forever from me. Length, 97 minutes. The version we saw is 97 minutes. Wikipedia says there's an 85, 95, 97, and 100-minute version of this movie. We saw the 97-minute. It could just be a cut scene. Some of these movies, like once the code went into effect, they'd re-release them later, like years later in the theater, and they would cut stuff they didn't like. So that's why you'll see longer movies suddenly much shorter to fit the code. But I don't know why there would be a 3-minute longer version of this. I don't know. We got actress Ruby Keeler playing Kit Fitz. We got actor Dick Powell as Richard the Canary Palmer Grant Dorsey Jr. And we got our old friend, Pat O'Brien from Here Comes the Navy, once again playing almost an identical role as Scrapper Thornhill. Movie was nominated twice, once for Outstanding Production and once for Sound, and it won none of them. Flirtation Walk is a 1934 American romantic musical comedy written by Delmer Daves and Lou Edelman. It focuses on a soldier who falls in love with a general's daughter during the general's brief stop in Hawaii, but is bereft when she leaves with her father to the Philippines before their relationship can blossom. They are reunited several years later when the soldier is about to graduate from West Point and the general becomes the Academy's commandant. The film's title refers to a path near Trophy Point named Flirtation Walk, where cadets often take dance dates for some time alone. This film was, according to the New York Times, actually shot at West Point. Bobby Connolly did the dance sequences. He was the Busby Berkeley of this movie. I got a side note real quick, Sarah. Frank Borzage, I have seen 4 of his movies now. I have not liked the first 3 I watched. I'll reserve my judgment on this till the end. But people online are telling me, give Frank a chance. Give Frank a chance. There is another movie he makes in 1940 that everyone says is his best one. But one thing I'm seeing with this guy is he copies the popular movie from last year. Like these dance sequences are the Busby Berkeley dance sequences from 42nd Street and from Gold Diggers of 1933. It's like he saw those movies, was like, wow, those did really well. Those looked really cool.
I'm going to tell you why I have sympathy and why I care about Frank Borzage. He's an immigrant. His parents, he was born in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which is very close to where I grew up.
Okay, personal connection.
And he was one of 14 children. So to be as successful as he was as one of 14 children is pretty impressive. And he started out life as a miner and an actor. So he made 14 films, and his trademark was intense identification with the feelings of young lovers. So
yeah, definitely. All of his movies involve like a romantic A plot.
His working class history and his history as a person who grew up in a family of 14 is, I feel, a rags to riches story in real life. I really am on his side, and I want to like him already. So this movie also shares some things with Here Comes the Navy, in that this guy, the main character, I think they call him Canary because he sings, and the sergeant is called Scrapper. But Canary is just like, I wrote, apparently people in the 1930s punched each other in the face all the time because they get into a fight and the sergeant punches him in the face, and then he comes in and he's like, oh, I really gotcha, didn't I? Like,
yeah, and they're like best buds, and you're like, wait a minute, like, what kind of friendship is this?
Yeah, right. This movie forced me to research the history of Hawaii and why we were stationed there in the military. Because do you know what year Hawaii became a state?
Of course I know, but why don't you just tell the people at home so
Well,
that they can know
up
too?
until up until 1893, it was a kingdom, and then it was annexed as a territory in 1898. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, obviously 1898. I knew that too. Hey everyone, Kenny in the editing booth here. I just want to clarify this that it was a territory in 1898 because everybody knows that it became a state officially, the 50th state, on August 21st, 1959. I just assumed everybody knows that, but the podcast version came out a little early, and so I didn't have this clarification in there. But yeah, we all obviously knew that. Obviously. Back to you, Sarah.
I thought that was very interesting. I mean, that was obviously not in Hawaii. It was obviously like they do a screen in the back and people dancing in front of it.
It said this. It was done on the set. It was the largest one ever built at Warner Brothers. Took them almost a week to film it, and following the completion of that number, they did the military wedding next, which had over 400 dancers. The guy who did the dance sequences, Bobby Connolly, he also did the dancing in The Wizard of Oz. So he's
Oh,
a little bit of street cred, Bobby Connolly.
yeah.
I say these things about Frank Berzage, like I'm like I don't like his movies. I feel like he copies, but I'm not gonna deny that he makes beautiful movies and he does do some interesting camera work. The whole scene where these two, should I read the synopsis or
Go ahead, read it.
Richard Palmer Grant Dorsey Jr., also known as the Canary, as Sarah pointed out, is an enlisted man in the United States Army stationed in the Hawaiian Islands. He has a contentious but friendly relationship with his sergeant. This is the fella that punched him, Scrapper Thornhill. When General Fitz visits the post with his daughter Kit on the way to Manila, Dick is assigned a driver to a reception that evening. Instead, Kit has Dick drive her to a moonlit luau, and he sings Aloha O. They are discovered in each other's arms by Scrapper and Lieutenant Biddle, who is also in love with Kit. Biddle accuses Dick of ruining Kit's reputation and forcing her to accompany him off post. This causes Dick to decide to desert. Scrapper begs Kit to straighten things out with Biddle. To prevent Dick from deserting, Kit tells him that she was responding to a crazy impulse and he means nothing to her. Stung by the words and Biddle's condescending statement, "If you were an officer and a gentleman, you'd understand." Dick decides to compete with Biddle as an equal and applies to West Point. Basically the same plot of Here Comes the Navy. He is accepted and does very well, to Scrapper's delight. In the first class year, Dick becomes first captain, and General Fitz is appointed academy superintendent, with Biddle present as his aide. While most of his classmates are infatuated with Kit, Dick is cold to her. Consequently, he is not very happy when the rest of the men insist that she participate in the traditional 100th night theatrical performance that he is to direct. Sarah, this is the part of the movie where I'm like, this happens at West Point? Like, this
It
is
does.
a
The 100th night, I looked it up. It's a real thing.
All
yeah.
right, when I'm done with this paragraph, I want you to tell me about it because I did not look it up. So Dick writes a comedy about a female general and a message directed at Kit. After the first rehearsal, Kit walks with Dick on Flirtation Walk and tries to explain why she told him she was not in love with him. Dick is too angry to listen to Kit, but during their on-stage love scene, kisses her, and she admits she loves him. When near graduation, General Fitz announces Kit's engagement to Biddle. Dick naturally is confused and visits her after lights out to talk her out of marrying Biddle. He's caught by Biddle, and at Biddle's suggestion, agrees to resign from the academy to protect Kit's name. Scrapper arrives at the academy to see Dick graduate and is disappointed to learn of his resignation. The day is saved when Biddle tells Dick that his resignation was not accepted and that Kit returned his ring, and he wishes him good luck. Dick graduates a happy man. The other thing, Sarah, before you get on the 100th night thing, is these two main actors, Ruby Keeler and Dick Powell, were the stars of the Busby Berkeley film 42nd Street. They were the main character. So that's why I say, like, okay, and now Frank Berzage is doing a musical like Busby Berkeley with the two actors from the same movie. Okay.
It happens, Sometimes if something's a winning thing, they're like, try this thing out, do this thing, The 109th show is something that firsties are supposed to do. Firsties celebrate 100 nights until graduation. Cadets perform skits they had written and rehearsed that reflected on their past experiences. So I think this is a creative take on that. But what I wrote is this is a movie about goofing off in the services. It's not about actual work. Actually, much like Beetle Bailey, the comic, it's about these servicemen, whether in the real army or traveling the world, are fraternity loafers and men of leisure. So these guys are just goofing off for the whole movie. It doesn't cover the scenes where they're actually doing anything. Because I wrote, what are they teaching these cadets? Is the only thing the person who made this movie knows about this West Point is the band? Because that's all the scenes are them marching to the band.
This is an example of where Frank Berzacce was not in the military and he's making a military movie.
Right. And then at one point, there was a quote that said, "For the last 3 years, all I've done is parade." So what are the points of this movie? Something that came up that didn't come up in Here Comes the Navy is this wrestling between what being in the real army is, because his scrapper is telling him the real army is the people doing the work, not these guys who are parading around. And then they show them at West Point, and they are just parading around. They're not doing anything more interesting. And then they're like, oh, we got to work really hard on this play that we're making. That's a goofy musical. I'm like, there's no way this is what they do at West Point. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm like, are these guys ready for battle? Because I don't know that.
Right? Yeah. It's another one of those movies where they're like, romance is only going to screw you up. Yeah. Like, he meets this lady, and it's one night, and for whatever reason, similar to Here Comes the Navy, women are just visiting the army all the time, just showing up with many bags for men to carry. Like, it's some kind of, I was like, does he work in a hotel? Why does he got to go get her bags? And it's like, oh, well, she's visiting her father. Just like on Here Comes the Navy, where that guy's sister just came on deck for some reason. Like, they're always just having women come and visit them in the army and the Navy. They're like, yeah, come on over. Beautiful women wearing dresses have some part in what we're doing here.
And you're like, these beautiful women, like they're going on these, they're showing up in these male dominated areas. And it's like, this is the first time they've ever been hit on by a guy. It's like, I don't believe that for a second. Doesn't deserting mean you're going to jail? Like, when they get you, like all these guys that are just like, I'm out of here. Like, that's like a major crime. And I'm pretty sure you spend a lot of time in a prison when you do that, but they never address that. They're never like, really? You'd rather not just finish your 2 years? You'd rather spend like 20 in a military brig or something, Like, it's just so weird. These pro military movies that have the support because they're allowed to film on real locations, and they have those patriotic characters, but then your leads are these guys who are just willing to leave. Like, they're just like, I met a girl, I'm done.
I mean, he gets in trouble because he takes her someplace else, even though she has to go. But why does he have to desert if he wants to desert to be with her?
Yeah, right? Or he wants to desert to be on the lam. Like, he's really looking forward to that.
And then where are you going to go on the lam if you're on the island of Hawaii? You're going to get on a boat.
Yeah, where are you going to desert? They're going to find you. You're on Hawaii. I don't know. I don't know what do you think this rise of military movies in 1934 is all about?
It's not about getting people. I mean, it's about making the military look fun, I guess.
It's like a recruiting.
And then I wrote down, important question to ask yourself at this point in the movie. Do army officers spend this much time writing comedy? Anyway, it wasn't a comedy. It was a musical for sure. But then they say it's a comedy because it's based on the ridiculous assumption women become the officers and give all the orders. It's the most offensive play that exists.
And he wrote it, the main character. So he also wrote a scene where he kisses her. So, I mean, there's a lot of... Right.
But, like, the song was no horse, no wife, no mustache. But then the whole thing the woman does when she's in charge is make all the officers and women marry each other. Like, that's what she does. Like, she's like, I'm in charge. Everyone's getting married. That's what she does. That's her decision. My favorite part was when they're walking on flirtation walk during the they were working on the play, and he's trying to be really chill about it. He's like, "No, I'm not interested in you. You're not screwing me up this time," which she ultimately does.
Yeah.
And they're walking on flirtation walk, and she goes, "This is flirtation walk, isn't it, Dick?" I love when they say the name of a movie in the movie.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
an exciting thing for me.
You get the goosebumps at that point. You're like, it's the same as when they say the name of the band in the song, when you're like, we're just a minor threat. And you're like, ooh, that's the name of the band. You know that in real life, those plays are probably 2 or 3 guys coming out saying some awkwardly written dialogue, getting a bunch of guffaws from the audience. Like, there's no way it's this Broadway level of, sets and costumes, and we got to get our cue.
Yeah, so then the end of the thing, Kit is actually engaged to someone else who watches them kiss on stage and is like, very good acting, guys, right? So then
great play.
So he tries to quit because he's like, I'm quitting. I can't be in the army or the whatever if I have to deal with this guy and her being married.
Yeah.
Right? And then it all wraps up in a minute where the guy Kit was engaged to cheerfully tells him he wasn't allowed to resign, and that Kit gave him his ring back with a smile and a handshake. So he gives the guy, he's like, Kit, give me my ring back, smiles, gives the guy a handshake, and
Good
says,
job.
Clearly,
another guy dumping himself in a movie because it's easier to.
Clearly, he's like, clearly you two are meant to be together. I wasn't that into getting married to her anyway. And then they have a parade. And the best part of the parade is when the little girl goes, look, Mama, that man's crying. And he sees Canary marching and the sergeant's watching and crying because he's so proud of him.
Yeah, their relationship was probably the most interesting. It's time for us to go back. Are you ready to come back to real life?
Yeah.
All right. Sarah, we've talked about 12 movies. It's already the next day, or it's getting close to midnight.
It's really long.
Getting very close to midnight right now. The sun has gone down. Give me everything up to the top 4.
Okay, so I've got Here Comes the Navy, Cleopatra, because I just didn't like that.
Low.
Yeah, pretty low. Flirtation Walk, Viva Via, One Night of Love, Barretts of Wimple Street, House of Rothschild, White Parade, and then my top 4.
And then I feel like we're pretty close. We're just a little Gay Divorcee and Cleopatra opposites. So, all right, Sarah, we're doing this right now. We're gonna pick the best picture. Grab your envelope. The music is playing. So, Sarah, we're about to pick the best picture. Wait a minute. Look at the time. Oh my God. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! We did it! The New Year! It's 2024. Sarah, Old Lang Syne is playing right now. I knew something was up. What's your wish? I can't believe you agreed to do this on New Year's Eve, and this is how you're spending your New Year's with us all. What's your wish for the new year?
I wish that you finish. Am I supposed to say it out loud?
Yeah, no.
I got really excited when we blew the honker. He came. He's like, "What are you guys doing?" I wish for you to finish this project. I want you to watch all the movies, and by that time, you're going to be a movie expert, Kenny.
I will. I'll know everything about the history of cinema. 10 years from now. Oh, there's your cat! Golden Boy 2024. We did it. We made it. We're in a new year. The show is still going on. I got confetti in my head. That's fun, isn't it?
Does it say Happy New Year?
No, it says 2024.
Oh.
This is
I can't believe we sat here for this many hours and talked about movies.
I would love to have time to research every one of these movies, and I would recommend the people watching and listening. There's Actually, this new podcast that just started, I think it's called Shea Cinema. Let me look it up because I want to give them a shout out. Okay, yeah. So I would recommend Shea Cinema, the Best Picture project. It's done by a father-daughter team, and they are going through, similar to us, every Oscar starting at the first one. I think they're at the third Oscars now, and they're doing long 2-hour episodes on every movie nominated. So I give them props because that is a lot of. These are 2 to 3 hour episodes, and we're talking about 12 movies. But it's a great show, and they go really in depth for people who want that. This show's not that, so I think hopefully the viewers at this point realize this show's about renewing interest in these movies, and can we as a modern audience watch these and enjoy them and still place them in the time in which they're fun. I think that's what this show is about. So Sarah, you got your envelope? My envelope with some branding. And the winner of the 7th Academy Awards and the 7th Golden Boy for Best Picture is...
It Happened One Night. That's me. I actually chose The Gay Divorcee. Oh, I did write it down, but it's just written on my coffee-stained, miserable paper.
And the 7th Golden Boy for Best Picture goes to 2 movies. The Gay Divorcee by Mark Sandrich and It Happened One Night by Frank Capra. Money might be tight, but love is free at the 7th Academy Awards.
If I was in a situation, if I was existing during the Great Depression, I probably would have liked It Happened One Night better. But I felt like the reason I liked it was because of the singing and dancing. And if that's your criteria for movies, the singing and dancing in that movie was just a little better. I just had the most fun with The Gay Divorcee because in this modern world of ours, I need to be entertained constantly. And I think The Gay Divorcee is a better movie for people with short attention spans. It just is like in your face, in your face, in your face, dancing, choreography. It's certainly not a better story than It Happened One Night. But they both share a lot of things too.
Yeah.
Namely, married women finding other men to be with.
It's true. It's a popular theme of the time. I did have Cleopatra at 4, but
Wow.
It was
Top 4. What were your top 4 movies? Let's hear them.
It was It Happened One Night, Imitation of Life, The Thin Man, and Cleopatra.
I feel like I want to do a second take where we just talk about all the things I forgot to mention, like how Claudette Colbert didn't want to be at the awards, that she was on a train leaving town, and they called her and made her come off of the train that before it left and come to the award ceremony.
Yeah, because she was so positive Bette Davis was going to win because of all the write-in support, and then she got handed the award by Shirley Temple.
What a year Claudette Colbert had! Like that was
impressive
year. Like, and did she memorized all those lines and like she just acted her pants off.
Yeah, I read that she was getting paid. They offered her $25,000 to be in this movie, and she was being traded from another company to be in this movie. She didn't want to do it at all, so they offered to double her salary to $50,000, and they would do it in a certain amount of weeks so she could go on vacation immediately following the making of the movie. She hated making the movie, like you mentioned, and told her friends about it afterwards. But what's funny is after this movie came out and was a huge success, she was able to start asking, like, I think it's $250,000 per movie. So she becomes overnight success from just from this movie.
That's what the most interesting thing is that like you're going to be able to track people's careers through movies and really see like the development of motion pictures as you go through it. But God bless you, because every year is not going to be a great year. I think the 60s will be really fun, but it's going to be like they're going to increase the number of movies that are going to be nominated, aren't they?
No, you are one of the lucky 2 who will get to do more than 10 movies, because there's only twice in the Oscars history they nominated more than 10. They did 12 this year and they did 12 next year. So you and our mystery host next week will have to watch 12 movies.
Like in my mind, once I watched all of them, I can't help but compare them all together, especially since it was like, that must be what they call the zeitgeist, was like the things that were going on. I think, you know, it just once you watch all the movies, you have to start being like, what was going on with the military at that time? Why were they doing that? Why was this how people felt about marriage? Like, why was that happening, you know?
Sarah, it was great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Kenny. It was really great to be here, and it was great to talk about movies.
Happy New Year, everybody! Thanks for watching episode 7. We'll be back in a month with episode 8, which coincidentally is the 8th Academy Awards. Funny how that works, with a new guest. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks, Sarah. See you all next time.
Happy New Year, everyone. Executive producer Goldstein here in the editing booth. Kenny is out rescuing next month's guest host, who is currently dangling from a Zeppelin by a rope. Last month, the channel released The Crowd by King Vidor, accompanied by a soundtrack Kenny compiled using Epidemic Sound. Support the channel and yourself by watching it. It was the unanimous winner of Golden Boy Episode 1, and until now, a forgotten classic. You can also help out by hitting like and subscribing to the Moronic Logic channel, if you haven't already. And if you watch any of the movies, leave your insights, opinions, and your pick for the Golden Boy down below. Next episode should be out by April 1st. Here's your homework for the 8th Academy Awards of 1936. The Lives of a Bengal Lancer by Henry Hathaway. David Copperfield by George Cukor. Ruggles of Red Gap by Leo McCarey. Naughty Marietta by Robert Z. Leonard. Les Miserables by Richard Boleslavsky. The Informer by John Ford. Alice Adams by George Stevens. Broadway Melody of 1936 by Roy Del Ruth. Top Hat by Mark Sandrich. A Midsummer Night's Dream by Max Reinhardt and William Dieterle. Mutiny on the Bounty by Frank Lloyd, and Captain Blood by Michael Curtis. See you next month, and keep watching movies.